Very good morning, Dr. Datta. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. If you could please, I would request the dignitaries to please put their mic on mute, that we can start this. Thank you so much. So, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to all the dignitaries, experts, colleagues, and participants who are joining us from across the country and even from neighboring countries in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and other countries as well. For this all-important 3-day eConclave on fostering cyclone resilience in industries, infrastructures, and communities on this beautiful Thursday morning. Cyclones and tropical storms have had devastating impacts on our coasties and infrastructures, as extreme events are becoming the new normal in an increasingly climate-constrained world. Countries' critical infrastructure must be built to withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from the disruptions they cause. Well, they say investing in climate-resilient infrastructure at an unprecedented scale would yield the triple dividend of saving lives and livelihoods, minimizing economic loss, and ensuring efficient allocation of resources for development. Well, with that thought and with that premise, I would, would like to go on with the first speaker for the welcome address. I would now request and like to welcome Shri Dilip Chenoy, Secretary General FICCI, for his welcome address. Over to you, Shri Chenoy.
Thank you, thank you, Rubab, for that, and a very warm welcome. Good morning to everybody on this for this eConclave on fostering cyclone resilience in industries, infrastructure, and communities. The Honorable Minister Shri Nityanand Rai, who will be joining us shortly. Mr. Rajendra Singh, Member, National Disaster Management Authority, Mr. Pradhan, Director General NDRF, Mr. Dr. Mrityunjay Mohapatra, Director General of Meteorology, Indian Meteorological Department, Mr. Rajkumar, Director NRSC from ISRO, of course, Major General M.K. Bindal, Executive Director NIDM, and Mr. Devapriya Datta, Advisor and Head and Scientist for Equity, Empowerment and Development from the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, Mr. Ajendra Kumar, President, ESRI India Technologies Limited, and of course, Lieutenant General J.R. Bharadwaj, the Chairman of CIDM, and Mr. Rubab Sood. A very good morning once again, and welcome to this e-conclave on a very important topic here. And as Rubab just mentioned, that we have to build cyclone resilience infrastructure, and we need to make the communities and industrial sector totally resilient to withstand the cyclones here. As he mentioned, India has a vast coastline vulnerable to impacts of tropical cyclones. We have representatives from neighboring countries here. They also have coastlines. They also are actually have cyclones impacting them. And the many cyclones have impacted India and in the neighboring regions over the last few years. Of course, the challenge here is how do we ensure that the impact of any subsequent cyclone is minimized. We have the ability to predict it much more accurately, and then take measures to actually ensure that neither there's no lives lost or there's no damage to either infrastructure or industrial activity. I think the FICCI has always worked in this sector, keeping the safety and planning aspects of industry, communities, and establishments in mind, especially the Chemical and Industrial Disaster Management Board at FICCI, in partnership with the National Disaster Management Authority, the Government of India, the Economic Advisory Council to the Honorable Prime Minister, the Government of India, and the National Institute of Disaster Management. We are all partnering in this effort to conduct a 3-day e-conclave on fostering cyclone resilience in industries, establishments, and communities. It is a pleasure for us to actually partner with NDMA, the EAC PM, and NIDM. I'll also welcome this partnership with the Indian Meteorological Department, IMD, Ministry of Earth Sciences, the National Remote Sensing Center, Department of Space, Government of India, and also the National Disaster Response Force, NDRF, Ministry of Home Affairs. So very warm welcome to each one of them, and of course the Indian Institute of Technology, Chennai, and key United Nation agencies for their partnership. A very warm welcome to each one of their representatives. A warm welcome to Major General Bindal, Executive Director, NIDM. A special thanks to Dr. Chandan Ghosh and the entire NIDM team at NIDM for their constant support and guidance, and continuing to collaborate with FICCI's CIDM board and other stakeholders on issues of national importance in the area of disaster risk reduction. I would also like to welcome the representatives from our supporters, GAIL, Indian Oil Corporation, Power Grid Corporation, ESRI, and RMSI, who are actually supporting this conference both technically and financially. I know that the minister would be joining us a bit later, but I would once again want to welcome each one of the distinguished panelists in this inaugural session, each of the speakers and the chairs of the session who are going to be speaking over the next 3 days, and of course all members from the stakeholders across government, industry, scientific and technical institutions for actually being with us over the 3 days. Thank you very much, and I hope you have exciting 3 days going forward. Keep safe and keep well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chinoy, for that very warm welcome and acknowledging the support and partnership of all the partners who have helped us put this entire event, this eConclave together. Thank you so much for your remarks, sir. Thank you. Moving on, I would like to, we have Dr. Mrityunjay Mohapatra joining us. Yes, he's joined us. A very good morning to you, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for your support and in organizing this eConclave. Thank you. Moving on now, I would now call upon Shri Agendra Kumar, President, ESRI India Technologies Limited. ESRI has partnered with this particular eConclave, and before I call him for his special address, a brief introduction of Mr. Agendra, who has 25 years of experience in IT business management and has served as the country head of several multinational technology companies. In his last assignment, he was the managing director of SGI India. He has been associated twice with SGI, with a prior stint as director as well. Agendra Kumar, President, NITGS Limited, once said, he was leading the business at Easily India, which is the #1 brand in GIS technology. We look forward to your special address, Mr. Kumar, and also the solutions, the IT solutions, the GIS-based solutions you have. I'm sure they're already benefiting the country and the region. We would like to know more, on your ideas and your thoughts on the cyclone resilience of the nation. Over to you, Mr. Kumar.
Thank you, Rubab. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by thanking FICCI for giving S3 India the honor to join as the GIS partner for this eConclave. And I'm happy to see and virtually meet so many eminent personalities like Lieutenant General Bhardwaj, Mr. Rajendra Singh, then Dr. Mohapatra, who's just joined us, Dr. Rajkumar from NRSC, Major General Bindal, Dr. Gupta from DST, and Mr. Chinoy from FICCI. Once again, thank you for having me deliver this keynote. And many other people who are participating, as it was mentioned, who are from even from other countries. And this eConclave is being organized on a topic which is very, very important. Communities around the world are facing increased challenges from natural and man-made disasters. In such situations, resilient communities bounce back faster. Leaders of these communities anticipate future trends and enact policies that support rapid response during times of need. When facing challenges like cyclones, resilient communities depend upon GIS technology to prepare ahead of time, operate effectively during events, and recover quickly. As you all know, Indian subcontinent is one of the worst affected regions in the world. The subcontinent, with long coastline of over 8,000 kilometers, is exposed to nearly 10% of the world's tropical cyclones. Of these, the majority have their initial genesis over the Bay of Bengal and strike the east coast of India. On an average, 5 to 6 tropical cyclones form every year, out of which 2 to 3 are more severe. Many cyclones occur in the Bay of Bengal than the Arabian Sea, while at the ratio being around 4:1. As we see more climate changes, the occurrence of natural disasters like cyclones may become more frequent, which means we have to start looking at these disasters as something to be prepared for, to anticipate better, and start building new plans and new infrastructure. That is where we find the role of GIS and remote sensing being very critical in disaster management. The applications of remote sensing and GIS have become well developed and successful tools in disaster management. These applications allow for the combination of different kinds of spatial data and non-spatial data, attribute information, and use them in a very useful manner in various stages of disaster management. In this short talk, I would like to share with you my thoughts on 3 areas. What are the resilient communities? When I say communities, I also like to include industries and infrastructure that goes along with that. How to build them and how do we sustain them? We need to start by looking at resiliency as a system that consists of people or community systems, economic systems, and environmental systems. A resilient system must be able to withstand the impact of disasters like cyclones and recover quickly. We need to keep the resilience in mind when building communities, infrastructure, and industries. GIS-based mapping, creating a geographical database of people and assets, helps us in knowing where to focus in pre- and post-disaster situations. Building an early warning system is the key to maximizing the number of people who take appropriate and timely actions for the safety of life and people. Warning systems start with detection of upcoming events so that people can be moved out of the harm's way to safer locations. GIS helps in mapping the areas which are more prone to disasters and identification of safer locations and building infrastructure like cyclone shelters at those locations. Some of the states in India have done very well in this part of disaster management, which helps them in minimizing the loss of life during disasters like cyclones. Now, how do we build such infrastructure and more resilient communities? That is where the concept of geodesign comes in. Geodesign uses stakeholder input, creative design techniques, build rigorous methodologies, and spatial analytics and mapping to find most suitable, environmentally friendly, and sustainable options. Human ingenuity has already led the era of digital transformation that is currently changing how organizations, including those that use GIS technology, to do business. Cloud computing, big data analytics, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and web GIS are in the mix, along with the strategic vision on how to bring everything together to achieve a mission. Integrating geodesign into everything we build requires well thought out technologies that work and help people. Bringing GIS and BIM building information modeling software, often each of these are an island into itself, but bringing them much closer helps the architecture, engineering, and construction of the infrastructure. It is about integrating BIM and GIS data and workflows for creating better designs which are more resilient and sustainable. Such designs go a long way in efficient handling of search and rescue operations when a disaster strikes. Search, rescue, and evacuation procedures are carried out immediately after disasters like cyclones strike a certain area. These are major operations usually performed by local volunteers, voluntary organizations, and district and state agencies. The basic aim of all such operations is to ensure the survival of the maximum number of victims. Proactive mapping and GIS-based plans help in better rescue and relief planning. Based on the available maps, a plan is worked out with the help of local people. And often aerial surveys are carried out and appropriate steps are taken by various teams involved in carrying out these operations. Besides bringing relief material, the aim is also to control panic and confusion and to provide moral support to people. And that's where mobile GIS apps can help in gathering information and communicating with the community, industry, and other organizations. So that's where the community GIS technology helps in building a communication platform so that the messages can be sent to various members in the community and people who are involved in relief and rescue operations. Then comes the assessment of the damage caused by cyclone, and that is during and immediately after the cyclone. During cyclone, remote sensing data provides timely and detailed information that are required by authorities to locate and identify the affected areas and to implement corresponding damage mitigation. It is essential that information be accurate and timely to address the emergency situations like dealing with diversion of inundated water, evacuation, rescue, resettlement, dealing with water pollution, other health hazards, and handling of interruption of utilities like electricity and telecommunication and water distribution. The disaster extent maps, real-time monitoring by remote sensing data, and understanding of the damage to buildings and infrastructure. These have to be mapped almost at the same time as these operations are going on. Coming to relief, which starts after the cyclone, this is the stage when rebuilding of destroyed and damaged facilities and adjustments of the existing infrastructure occurs. The time factor is not so critical in this phase, but nevertheless, both medium and high resolution remote sensing images together with an operational GIS system can help to plan many tasks. The medium resolution data can establish the extent of damage, whereas high resolution data comes very handy in pinpointing the location of damaged buildings, washed out roads, homes, and other facilities. So in disaster management situations like cyclones, it's a multidisciplinary and proactive approach. Besides various measures for putting in place institutional and policy framework, disaster prevention, mitigation, and preparedness initiated and initiatives being taken by central and state governments and other organizations and media also have a key role to play in achieving our goal for moving together towards a safer country. Techniques like satellite imagery and GIS help to identify areas that are disaster prone, zoning them according to risk magnitudes, inventory of populations and assets at risk, and simulating damage scenarios. Now, these tools are even useful in managing disasters as they provide instant access to information required in management decisions. Esri India has been working with NDMA and several SDMAs over the years in building GIS applications. I would like to conclude by thanking various government and non-government bodies involved in disaster management for providing us the opportunity to serve. And we're grateful for that, and we would like to continue to be engaged in these missions. as we continue to face these disasters over and over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Agendra Kumar. Ladies and gentlemen, that was President Esri, Esri India. It was really wonderful to know more about what the technological solutions which are available, especially in the GIS domain, and how they can really benefit, in countries' resilience building, especially from extreme weather conditions. I think that was a very relevant perspective which you shared from a solution point of view. Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar, for those inputs. Before we move on to the next speaker, I would like to formally welcome Dr. Muzaffar Ahmad, who has joined us. Dr. Ahmad, thank you so much. Dr. Ahmad is former member of National Disaster Management Authority, ladies and gentlemen, and part and member of the FICCI's CIDM board as well. Moving on, I would now like to request Shri Dr. Devapriya Datta, who is the advisor and head scientist G, Science for Equity, Empowerment and Development SEED, State Science and Technology Program SSTP, Patent Facilitation Program, and most importantly, National Geospatial Program, the NGP, of the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Before I request Dr. Datta for his special address, I would like to thank him and the Department of Science and Technology for partnering with this initiative, with this eConclave of Cyclone Resilience. It's a very important role which DST plays, and especially the NGP platform plays in building resilience in the country. A background introduction of Dr. Datta. He completed his PhD from the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, New Delhi, and joined the National Agriculture Research Service of AR. He served as scientist in the Central Soil and Water Conservation Research and Training Institute. He was appointed as the counselor, Science and Technology, in the Embassy of India, Washington, D.C. during 2008 to 2012. Dr. Datta was deputed to the Blackland Soil and Water Research University of Texas as UNDP visiting scientist during 1998 as well. On that note, I would now like to call upon and request Dr. Datta for his special address. Over to you, Dr. Datta. I think we are having some technical difficulty.
Okay, no. I think,
yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you loud and clear, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So, thank you, Rubab. And first of all, I thank FICCI and NIDM for organizing this important eConclave, which is an indicator of our national resilience when the pandemic is challenging us. I think in different occasions we have responded to it by going to this digital platform. So I think I thank you and really congratulate you. And also this is an especially it is it's a privilege to be with many of the luminaries of the Indian disaster risk management and the disaster risk reductions, to be in the same the sessions, and all of us know as in the stakeholder of the disaster management, which got changed into a disaster risk reduction by the introductions of the Sendai framework in 2015. And the Sendai framework, especially, and which has been adopted in our, the national disaster plan, management plan, also, that it has highlighted the use of the space technologies, including geographical information systems, the using of the measurement tools, data collection, data analysis, and the disseminations of data as an important part of this, the risk reduction and the resilience building. The resilience building at a national level, at a regional level, and also at a community level. If we look, the disaster reduction, it has been incorporated into the 25 targets in 10 of the 17 sustainable development goals. And from the point of view of the science and technology, because being the Ministry of Science and Technology, it talks about that there should be the interface between the and integrations of the space technologies with the other the frontier ICTs like AI and the ML. Also, there is a huge research opportunity for including the global satellite navigation system for the infrastructure and the utility mapping relevant to the disaster damage assessment and the early warning system. The innovation component of that, which needs integrating utilizations of the space and the geoinformatic applications with the new methods, tools, and technologies from the other digital innovation tools, needs to be focused in the country. If you see that an important component of the UN, which is looking into the geospatial usage of the geoinformation management, has focused on disaster management as one of the the disaster risk reduction as one of the area for using this technology. So it includes the sustainable reconstruction phase of the infrastructure in the post-disaster plans, reinforcement of the resilience through the recovery and recovery observatory concept. So if we look into in the context of the Indian the situations in the in the total Asia Pacific itself, the climate related disasters in like 2020, it affected 75 million people, and which caused almost 6,000 deaths in total Asia Pacific regions, and which is caused mostly 68% by the flood, followed by the tropical cyclone, which is 16%, which is the focus of these 2 days of the eConclave, and the landslide is the next as the 15 the persons. The usage of these technology, especially the geospatial technology, in terms of these, the management of cyclone has well been proved. Like we have proved in the context of a national situations in case of Falin or in Hudud and in case of Fani in 2019. So every time a cyclone which hits the coast, it causes the huge loss of the human lives and the infrastructures. So there is the requirement of that this technology should now be an integrated part of the this disaster risk reductions, the disaster management strategy in the country, and to a large extent we have been successful in that. But this year, when this disaster, the risk has been escalated by the another unseen, the disaster, which is a COVID-19. I would like to, to bring the, the attentions of the stakeholders to that directions, and we'll try to provide some of the points probably that could be one of the areas of the discussions during this too in eConclave, and we can take the different portions of it, the research portions, the innovation, the capacity building portions, and the operational portions of that into, like as an recommendations of this 2 days eConclave. If we look into this, the new demands of this COVID-19 during the disaster response was evident in May 2020, during when Cyclone Amphan, it hit the densely populated low-lying coastal area of Odisha, West Bengal in India, and the adjoining Bangladesh. A major issue, what the typical evacuation was there during this challenging situation. With the cyclone shelter, the community buildings are being used as a quarantine facility. Housing of the people who had returned home from the cities and stayed during the lockdown periods or undergoing the mandatory quarantine processes. If we see the risk of the infection was another layer of cascading layer of the the risk what we had to handle within this during these difficult times of the cyclone. In India itself, it was reported that the 559 members of the National Disaster Response Force and 170 personnel who fought against the cyclone Amphan was tested COVID-19 positive. There are several issues in June. Again, after May, there was in June in Cyclone Nisarga, which struck densely populated areas of the west coast of India, where COVID-19 was already was a hotspot of COVID-19. Here again, the our early warning systems followed by a large-scale evacuations undoubtedly has played a huge role in saving the life. However, the COVID-19 infections in that area accelerated. Between May and June 2020, the number of the confirmed cases of India rose from 100,000 to the 440,000. So there is no scientific evidence that how this disaster-related disruption in social distancing increased the number of infections, but they will have definitely they have played or cascaded this, the risk in that situations. So during these situations, that based on the global and the regional experience, I think we should look into usage of technology, especially the geospatial technology, is to identify the hotspots which have their higher, the risk profile in terms of struck by these climatic disasters during the different sessions, as well as the peak of the the pandemic. And the geospatial technology, the GIS and the other related to the data can help in this the directions. This can be during the flood sessions, during also the drought session also. There is a requirement of an early warning system. It's not only for the the early warning for these extreme disaster situations, along with the other extremes needs to be integrated with that, and that will help us in making a disaster risk matrix along with other health related, the livelihood related, the socio-economic related, the disasters what can be. We must invest in the resilient infrastructures which affect the maximum livelihood of the people. Suppose they take the case of a climate-related disaster in South Asia, and which affects the life of the mostly the poor people, and the COVID-19 has basically complicated on the supplemented to their the vagaries to promote the employment and economic growth. Whenever we do this resilience, we must also factor in it. An example, the fund can be invested in the climate proofing of land use and the water resource management. For example, we have an resilient Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, or MNREGA, which had around 80 million participants, and during this post-COVID situation, that was one of the main the scheme of the government which they helped many people to keep their livelihood alive. So there we must include that this this climate resilience and the climate proofing the activities to be integrated with that. We must have a lot of customized local solutions. In this context, the local knowledge, because all these technologies can only strengthen the local livelihood, but the local knowledge has used the people to sustain their in for years. So the local knowledge needs to be captured, and this new technologies should help them in finding out the customized local solutions which will strengthen the entire livelihood system of that. There is a requirement of a green and the resilient recovery. If we see our commitment to the especially the South Asia towards the sustainable development goal, there is a recent review of how the Pacific, the Asia Pacific countries have are performing in addressing the sustainable development goal, and it has been brought out that the current pace in the nations in this Asia Pacific region, which is the largest region in terms of the continent, that they will not address any one of the the 17 SDGs at the current pace of doing the business. So we need to have this look at it at though the disaster risk reduction is mainly it is pertinent to the SDG 13, but we have to find the linkage and to build up the interministerial, inter-stakeholder, the collaborations between the government, the private sector, and the civil society to address, so that the disaster, like a more coherent approach we can take with at a local, national, and the region level to reduce the disaster vulnerability and minimize the systemic risk with ensuring a green and low carbon recovery. So all of our this green and the low carbon cannot be looked as in separate with the disaster risk reductions and the livelihood systems and our economical recovery. We need to integrate that. And there, the role of the technology, especially the geospatial technology, can play a big role. The Department of Science and Technology, appreciating it, we have started a national, the spatial disaster risk reduction program, which will support mainly this new research issues in these directions. And like the suggestions is all the stakeholders, that as long as the knowledge generation is concerned, we can work together. We can work together with the different stakeholders and can strengthen these aspects of this cascading, the disaster risk reduction requirement during, like the disaster extremes, as well as the other, the risk involved with the health, with the socioeconomic the conditions, so that whatever the Honorable Prime Minister has told in this 10-point, the directives, we can convert that into the reality and in the practice. Thank you very much for the opportunity here.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Datta. And I think the way you've integrated, the various initiatives which you have taken, and also, you lead the NGP program at DST, also the SEED program and the SSTP. And I think there are so many linkages, and you very well highlighted that, and how DST can play a very important role in bettering and building resilience, especially from an extreme weather perspective. Thank you so much for your address and your thoughts. Thank you. Moving on quickly, I would now like to call upon Major General M.K. Bindal, Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, for the theme address. Before I briefly introduce General Bindal, I would like to welcome. I think we had the Minister's Office, which had logged in earlier, so we have the Minister's Office with us now, and very soon he will be coming on the screen as well. A brief file introduction of General Bindal. Presently, the ED NIDM. He belongs to National Defence Academy and holding a master's degree in Defence and Strategic Studies. He was commissioned into the Corps of Army Air Defence in December 1985. During his more than 3 decades of service, he has held important command and staff assignments. Major General Bindal served as the Provost Marshal in the United Nations mission in Mozambique, where he was deeply involved in the liquidation of the mission. He has been the Director, Center for United Nations Peacekeeping at New Delhi. For 3 years, he was also the Secretary of International Association of Peacekeeping Training Centers. On that note, thank you so much, General Bindal, for all your support, your guidance, and your leadership. Over to you for your theme address, Bindal sir.
Thank you, Rubab. First of all, I welcome all the participants who have joined this eConclave, and a very hearty welcome to the panelists, esteemed panelists who have come together to educate everyone about what is happening. Coming down to the topic, it was seen that cyclone is one of the disasters which is affecting a large area of the country. In fact, out of the 7,516 kilometers of coastline, out of which 5,400 kilometers is along the mainland, 132 kilometers is in Lakshadweep, and 1,900 kilometers is in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Almost 5,700 kilometers of that whole coastline is highly vulnerable to the impacts of tropical cyclones and related hydrometeorological hazards, and consequently to recurrent loss of life and property. So these coastal states are also susceptible to the impacts of tsunami, droughts, and the floods. So the cascading disasters which was mentioned with the previous speaker is very much is the new normal in these states. The studies have indicated that the natural disaster losses equate to India's GDP and up to 12% of the central government revenue. So it is now a well recognized fact that by taking long term, medium term, and short term mitigation measures, the loss of lives, loss to economy, loss to infrastructure, and environmental loss can be minimized. And if the coastal communities are prepared to become resilient against such disasters, they can recover from post disaster situations and plan better for reduced further risks. Hazard risk prevention and mitigation, which is it is a key development, and this has been the policy of the government of India, which lays greater emphasis on preparation, and mitigation. So the cyclones, which has already been mentioned, that cyclones that occur between tropics of Cancer and Capricorn are known as tropical cyclones. And Indian subcontinent is worst affected region of the world, as it is exposed of the world's tropical cyclones alone. There are 13 coastal states and UTs which are encompassing about 84 coastal districts which are affected by cyclones. Four states, that is Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, Tamil Nadu, and West Bengal, and one UT, that is Pondicherry, on the east coast, and Gujarat on the west, and now Goa, because cyclone Nisarg on the west coast, are more vulnerable to cyclone disasters. And 40% of the population lives within 100 kilometers of this coastline. Data for the period 1998 to 2000 shows that on an average, annually 370 million people are exposed to cyclones in India. So a broad scale assessment of population at risk suggests that an estimated 32 crore people, which account for almost one third of the country's total population, are vulnerable to cyclone related hazards. Climate change and its resultant sea level rise can significantly increase the vulnerability of the coastal population. Recurrent cyclones they account for large scale loss of livelihood opportunities, loss of public and private properties, severe damage to infrastructure. The Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 had killed several thousand coasts due to ignorance of the people about the phenomena and lack of preparedness and mitigation measures. More than nearly 60% are located within 200 kilometers of the coastline, and hence the importance of this eConclave to discuss resilience to the industries and the infrastructure and the business community against cyclones. There are large number of coastal zone management teams running in all the states, coastal states, and a very flagship program of National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project being run by NDMA, phase 1 and now phase 2, which is directly increasing the resilience of the coastal districts to cyclone. However, in all these schemes, the industries have been left out to a great extent. The industries are not part of the schemes. All the schemes are aimed at alleviation or increasing the resilience of the population and infrastructure next to the coastline within 100 kilometers of the coastline. So there is a need for the industry for to work out programs so that the resilience of the industry is also included in the planning process, and the industries also start taking steps to increase the uh, effectiveness of the measures that they take and their resilience to the business continuity, to the unimpeded functioning, or to uh, start functioning after a cyclone at a faster time frame in a better state is also prepared for, and that those mitigation measures are in view. So there's a need to mainstream the aspect of disaster risk reduction and resilience measures into the industries which are likely to get affected by cyclones in a major way. And efforts should be on that they should be also part of the interventions with various states doing, or which at the government of India we are doing. So with this, we are keen to hear all the domain experts who have come today, who will be giving us what is being done and what is the way forward uh, to create resilience to cyclones for the industries. And because of the lessons learned from this e-conclave of 3 days, I think we'll come out with a lot of lateral policy inputs for the government of India. With this, I again welcome everyone, and I thank FICCI CIDM for collaborating with NIDM to hold this e-conclave. We will have the minister soon, their officers joined, and we'll be looking forward to hearing his important issues on this uh, aspect. Thank you, and over to you, Rubab.
Thank you so much, Jan, for your very encouraging theme address. It's setting the tone and perspective of what to expect in these next 3 days. I think it wouldn't have been possible without your guidance of bringing all these important stakeholders together under one roof in one session, which would be led by none other than the Honorable Minister for Home Affairs, Sri Nityanand Rai ji. Thank you so much, Jan Bindal, yet again. Thank you. I would now like to also welcome Shri S.N. Pradhan, IPS DG NDRF. Thank you so much, Mr. Pradhan, for joining us for this very important e-conclave during this inaugural session. Thank you. I would now like to call upon the next speaker for the special address, Dr. Raj Kumar, Director, National Remote Sensing Center, Indian Space Research Organization, Department of Space, Government of India. Before I request Dr. Raj Kumar to make his special address, a brief introduction. Dr. Kumar is an outstanding scientist. That's a decoration which is given to eminent scientists in the country. Assumed office of Director, NRSC, ISRO Department of Space in January 2021. He was born in Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh, and completed education from Lucknow University. Joined the Space Applications Center, ISRO Ahmedabad, in '83. Over 35 years of experience, his leading activities related to understanding Earth system, processes, and interactions using Earth Observation Center and its application towards societal benefits, as well as studies in planetary sciences. He's also responsible for the calibration and validation of ISRO's first scatterometer, OceanSat-2. One of the key highlights of his career has been he plays a pivotal role in propelling collaborations with international space agencies like NASA, JAXA, CNES in microwave remote sensing, and also leading the Indian science team for NASA ISRO Joint Mission NISAR. On that note, I would now like to request Dr. Raj Kumar for his special address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Very good morning to you as well as all of the panelists in this very important session. And again, I'd like to thank FICCI for inviting me to participate in this very important conclave. As all of us know, cyclone is one of the major disasters which not only India but most of the tropical countries are facing. But India, because being of all the side coastal environment, we have that major problem. And under ISRO disaster management program, we are providing space-based and aerial-based disaster-specific inputs in real time to support the disaster management program, addressing most of the disasters, what we say, flood, cyclone, earthquake, etc. And then all these value-added products are generated mainly using the satellite data as well as the modeling. It helping in addressing the information needs. And all these products are being sent to the various agencies, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of External Agencies, NDMA, and local authorities. As we come today for mainly the cyclone, as we are discussing since the beginning, it is one of the major natural disasters that creates havoc for human life, agriculture, mainly infrastructure, roads, building, etc., and coastal area. That is actually very, very important. And impact not only by the heavy rainfall, but many people say, but very, very strong winds what we have during the cyclone. and the storm surges and associated floods inundate floods. It has also been observed by India Meteorological Department, Dr. Mahapatra is there, as well as by other researchers, that East Coast has been more vulnerable to cyclone than the West Coast. Yeah, it is true because of the atmospheric phenomena and the geographic features. This is most seen in the since the beginning, that East Coast, Bay of Bengal have many cyclones, severe cyclones also. However, it has been seen in recent decades. If you see it has been by the many researchers and recently also, the intensity of cyclone has increased mainly over the North Indian Ocean. And total number of cyclones might have changed, but intensified much faster. That is actually a very major research. If you see, intensification has been much faster in the recent times. One of the reasons may be due to the increase in sea surface temperature, or maybe which is not only the surface temperature but overall warming of the ocean itself. That means what we call as the ocean heat content or the cyclone heat potential. So that is also one important research topic, that how much it is imparting in the intensification of the cyclone, or maybe in the generation of the cyclogenesis time itself, how much a role ocean is having. Because sometimes we have seen that cyclone, when it takes the recurvature, at that time also overall role of the ocean, that is very important, because earlier it was supposed to be only the role of atmosphere, but ocean has very important role in this. In cyclone, as all of us know, first and foremost part is forecast in terms of track, intensity, landfall location, as well as the time. Everything starts from here and ends also there. All the planning by Disaster Management Authority, we know, as well in the states, are looking for the very accurate information. That is how the cyclone will, when the cyclone will be developed, how it will be, movement will be there, but the people who are involved in that, Dr. Mahapatra anyhow will be talking about that, know the difficulty and intricacies of this science of predictions of the cyclone and maybe all other weather phenomena. Recently, actually, I will give an example. When I was traveling to Guwahati last week itself, there was a lot of fog in that. When we started here, it was that the fog will be disseminated by the time we reach. But when we are reaching and we are trying to descend, the pilot told us because still fog is there in there, it will take some time. Again, we took the turn, and then after some time, again he told. He himself told that, yeah, this is the problem of we can say the forecasting, that is the challenges in the forecasting. So we know whatever observation we have, or whatever more and more observation we can go on including, but even then there are challenges, because the weather is so much dynamic phenomena, chaotic phenomena. Whatever you do, you can go on improving, but you cannot always have the accurate forecast. That is the we know all this. After the forecast, second most important is the preparedness of organization who respond to based on the information provided by the forecaster. Essentially, administration and governance system at the national and local levels in carrying out evacuation, providing shelter, relief, and rescue. But even then, we have seen in the forecast, cyclone has improved significantly during last decade, mainly due to the more and more observations what we have, mainly from the satellite, because from the satellite you can have the overall picture on the geostationary satellite, what we call it. Every time, every 30 minutes, you can have the information, so that you can monitor it very regularly. But in addition to that, ground-based information is also very important. And with the recent times, by the Ministry of Earth Science, we have many buoys in the oceans which have the very accurate information, Doppler weather radars, as well as the automatic weather stations. Many things which, because of that, we have better understanding of the cyclone generation, as well as the space-time history also we can develop. And then we come the most important part is using this data, what we call the assimilation of these data in the numerical models, so that we can have the predictions using these observations. We are really very proud that in recent times, cyclone forecast provided by IMD MOS have been very accurate. All of us might have seen it and observing it. In comparison to the earlier, the 2 decades, 3 decades earlier, improvement accuracy is very high in the case of 24-hour lead period as well as the 6-hour, 12-hour lead period. The skill has improved a lot. We know 2 decades back during the 99 Odisha cyclone, thousands of lives were lost and thousands of crores of the infrastructure were damaged. But if you see in the last cyclone, loss of life is very less actually. If you and accuracy of your forecast of landfall as well as this timeliness is improved a lot, so that authorities can take measures. For that purpose, Indian National Satellite, INSAT satellite, 3D and 3DR2 satellites, they are providing image at almost a 15-minute interval together, and have been found to very useful in detecting formation of cyclone, their extent, location, movement by the atmospheric motion vector winds, using the imager, as well as one system is called the sounder, by which you can have the vertical sounding of the vertical atmosphere profile. And you will be glad to know another experiment by Dr. Mahapatra himself, by IIT as well as ISRO, has using the INSAT geospatial satellite, what we call a rapid scan, have been quite useful in monitoring these events like cyclone event or the thunderstorm type of event. He may throw more light on the same. Using this type of scanning, one can monitor the cyclone or these events with very high temporal frequency. Not presently, I was talking about 30 minutes of it is regular frequency, but if we want rapid scan, we can every 5 minutes, so that how the changes in the cyclone track or the intensity is happening, these also can be monitored. It will be a smaller area, but it will be highly useful. Additionally, global measurement of ocean surface vector wind, what we call it, that means the wind on the surface provided by spectrometers. Indian spectrometers earlier was OceanSat 2 and now SCATSat, which allow that improved prediction of the ocean state itself. That I was talking ocean dynamics, ocean state, which is also helping in the timing of the cyclone as well as the prediction of this thing. Using historical wind data of the cyclone of spectrometer, technique have been developed for cyclogenesis, which predict the formation of the cyclone itself. That means initial state itself, when cyclone is not developed, within the prior to that 2-3 days, in some time we have seen the 5-6 days earlier itself, we can say that the cyclone is being developed, so that you can get prepared for that.
Dr. Rajkumar, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would like to take a moment to welcome the Honorable Minister for Home Affairs, Honorable Minister of State for Home Affairs, Shri Nityanand Rai ji. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you so much. On behalf of the entire CIDM board, the Presidium and our Secretary General, Shri Dilip Chinoy, who is for joining us, Mr. Saab. It's a great encouragement and motivation for us कि आपने हमारे साथ आज हमारे बीच में आ पाए हैं. Cyclone resilience के बारे में we are talking, and very senior, eminent head of the organizations are amongst us today. और हम आपके सुनना चाहेंगे sir in a moment. तब तक हम, with your permission, please, shall we continue with the addresses? We need your, with your permission, we'll continue with the addresses, sir. Thank you, Rajkumar ji.
Thank you, sir, Nityanand ji, for agreeing to just continue. I will just finish in very shortly, so that we can have your address, we can listen your views in this. Yeah, as I was talking about the measurements, that is wind measurement from spectrometer, we can have the very advanced the cyclone itself, cyclogenesis, and excellent network of Doppler weather radars of IMD and ISRO. There are many. So those also give very good information about the size and intensity of cyclones in advance, because they have the full picture of your coastal areas. And assimilation of these observations, that is very important for the forecast point of view. Assimilating these information, these observations from the satellite, aerial, as well as the ground-based into high-resolution models, what we can now run due to the computational information and hardware we are having. So it resulted in overall improvement of prediction of cyclones. Thereafter comes, after cyclone, when we have storm surge. That means how much water will be flowing in the coastal areas. That is also very important, that from the inundation point of view. And that is also a lot of models are being run, and in that also information from the satellite as well as the ground information is going, so that we can have the damage assessment, how much damage will be there. I will come upon that also. So that time role comes our disaster management authorities as well as national local authorities. That means how much damage may be there, that is likelihood will be there, and then afterwards when the forecast is there or actual cyclone reaches to the coast, then how much inundation is happening. As earlier told by Dr. Kumar, here comes the role of geospatial technology. There has been lot of advancement in the GIS in recent times, which can through which we can monitor rescue operation, damage assessment in much better way and much faster way also. High resolution digital elevation models which are available and being made available to check the inundation. That means up to centimeter accuracy, where we can go how much areas will be inundated based on the forecast. And 3D building model are being made based on the drones as well as the satellite data and ground-based measurement. So those will also help in near future, that means the planning as well as the trying to place the accuracy of this inundation. I am really very sure with the advancement of this technology, and especially in observation network with the satellite and ground truth, and with the very high vertical resolutions, that means every in the atmosphere, using state-of-the-art sounders, that atmospheric sounders, as well as navigational satellites, not only by India, but by all these countries all on the globe. We will have to have a much improvement in our knowledge of cyclone process, and will be able to provide insight into the intensification and decay of the cyclone, as well as the prediction of cyclones, through which we can really have the develop different models using the GIS, and so that people can use it mainly for the rescue operations as well as for the planning, so that we can have a much better, we can reduce the damage to the infrastructure, damage to the lives.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for your special address. We really appreciate the thoughts which you've shared, the knowledge which you've shared, and I think we must congratulate the immense work in the area of information systems and geospatial information system you've been doing in your organization. Thank you so much, and congratulations for becoming the director of your center. Thank you. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight change. Dr. Mrityunjay Mohapatra ji, before I call you upon for your special address, I would like to, because we just heard from Mr. S.N. Pradhan, DG NDRF's office, that he has a pressing engagement. So if you are okay with that, can we have his address just before you, and after, right, immediately we'll have your address. So thank you so much, Dr. Mohapatra, for your understanding. We have amongst us DG NDRF. Thank you so much, DG sir, for joining us. And I would like to also, compliment you and congratulate you that, and also mention that we are very proud to have a force like NDRF, which is on its way to be recognized as an international disaster rescue force by UN. It's a great honor for our country to have a force like NDRF. I call upon Mr. Pradhan, a brief profile. Satyanarayan Pradhanji, he took over as the DG of NDRF in last year, in January 2019. Prior to this, he served as Joint Secretary in Ministry of DONA. Shri Pradhan is an IPS officer from 88 batch of Jharkhand cadre, a postgraduate in political science. He's been awarded with many prestigious awards and recognitions, like the Chevening Fellowship of the British Council, as a poet of merit from the International Society of Poets as well, two-time winner of Prime Minister's Silver Cup essay competition also, and awarded President's Medal for Meritorious Service in 2006. On that note, I would now request Shri Pradhan for his special address. Shri Pradhan, your mic is on mute. You need to unmute yourself, sir.
Okay, just.
Yes.
Namaskar, Akhil ji, and Namaskar, MOS sir, and others, senior dignitaries who are present here. I thank FICCI for inviting me to this conclave on cyclone resilience. जहाँ तक cyclone resilience का सवाल है, we all are aware that one of the areas of disaster response where we have probably done remarkably well and traveled a long distance is the cyclone response. So I'll talk about cyclone response resilience, particular focus on response resilience. Now, what is response resilience? Disaster response is one of the frontline activities of a disaster management ecosystem. So we have a disaster management ecosystem in India since 2005, when we learned the lessons the hard way in 3 back-to-back disaster situations. 99, the Odisha super cyclone, losing more than almost 15,000 lives. 2 years later, followed by the Bhuj earthquake, again more than 13 to 14,000 lives, probably more unofficially, and then the tsunami in 2004. So in a space of 5 years, we saw three devastating disasters in the space of 5 years. Now, why this is significant is that this is the first 5 years of the last 2 decades. The first 5 years of the last 2 decades. So if you start from 99 and the journey to 2020 or 21 as we sit here, in the last 20 years, the very first 5 years were like a slap on the face of governance in India, in the sense that we had to wake up to disaster response and disaster management as mainstream governance. And after that, I think we have done well, and especially in the case of cyclone response, we have done remarkably well. So we always use this comparison that in 1999, the deaths were 10,000 plus, probably nearly 15 to 20,000. And in Cyclone Phony in 2019 in Orissa, which was a similar kind of a cyclone, maybe a tad less intense, we had 64 deaths. Although the devastation to property was very high, we had 64 deaths. So we were down to less than 1% of the deaths. So this is a remarkable achievement, and we must be proud of it. So this is also response resilience. This is response resilience. And response resilience is important because when a country responds effectively to cyclones, it saves lives and property before the cyclone, during the cyclone, and after the cyclone. The damages, the building back better, the recovery is faster. Now, regarding NDRF, the National Disaster Response Force contributes to cyclone resilience by responding fast, and for that it is dependent on other stakeholders like the IMD and the other agencies of the Ministry of Earth Sciences. But specifically, I'd like to thank IMD for its exact predictions. I think Mr. Rajkumar before me talked about the prediction capabilities that has reached a great level of excellence, and I must say we should be very proud of our prediction agencies, which gives us the input, the NDRF, the input to be in place well in time and right at the place where it is required. Just to exemplify, in the Cyclone Phony or Cyclone Amphan or Cyclone Nisarg, NDRF was there at least a week before the actual cyclone arrived. At least a week. Now that is a testimony of the efficiency of our prediction services. What does NDRF do after that? After reaching, NDRF builds on the resilience of the community. NDRF tells the community what to do, what not to do. NDRF helps in the evacuation. This is part of cyclone resilience. But what is also more important is a culture of cyclone resilience. I'm sometimes very proud and sometimes a little not so proud when I see the differential responses among states to the same cyclone. In one state, for the same cyclone X, which is going to hit two states, one state responds with alacrity and it evacuates on the higher side. It evacuates more people because it doesn't want to take a chance. The other state for the same cyclone is tardy in its evacuation, is tardy in its approach. And as a result, for the same cyclone, in one state there is zero loss of life, in another state there is some loss of life. I think these situations are avoidable. If you want cyclone resilience, then you must build a culture of resilience and build a culture of awareness, and you must act as one. So just to wrap up, I would feel that while we have traveled a long way in cyclone resilience, we must involve the community, because one of the entities named in the topic for today is resilience for the community. Now the community will be resilient only if it is aware, it is encultured, it is fully, oriented towards saving itself, helping save itself. Because let us remember that the gold standard of disaster resilience is the resilient community. It is not NDRF, it is not SDRF, it is not the other government agencies which must be resilient and prepared. But if it is a prepared and resilient community, that is real disaster readiness, that is real disaster resilience. And to be prepared, you must have a culture of preparedness. You must do mock drills round the year. You must be exposed to simulated situations round the year. And the government agencies like NDRF and SDRF must act in tandem with the community. As far as the industry is concerned, I think that is an area of slight concern, because especially the private sector industries have not yet, and FICCI must take this into account seriously, there is not a disaster orientedness and a disaster oriented culture in the private sector yet. Just to share, I'll just wrap up in 1 minute. Just to share this information for FICCI's, consumption, and it can build on this, that the Honorable Home Minister, the Honorable MOS is also here. They have mandated NDRF as a nodal agency through the NDMA to conduct a mock drill, a mega mock drill in each of the 740 odd districts of this country in the next 3 years. The first year is already going to be over in March. So we could, out of the 280 odd we had to do this financial year, we have been able to do more than 60% in spite of the COVID situation. So the mock drills is going to be based on the disaster profile of the district particularly. So if it has a chemical complex, for example, it will be a chemical industry disaster mock drill. If it is a cyclone oriented district, it will be a cyclone disaster mock drill. What I want and what I'm appealing through the FICCI is, let the concerned private industries in those districts please join hands with NDRF. And the other thing that the Honorable Home Minister and MOS sir has mandated is, what is the what are the equipments that you have, the inventory of equipment that can be used also for the district's benefit in a cyclone situation or any disaster situation. If you have an earth mover, if you have a porclane, if you have some other, you may have even boats, can they be used? Can some machinery be used in a situation where the district is facing distress or a disaster? That also is being attempted. The database has been made by NIDM. Major General Bindal is here. So all this is speaking of a coordination mechanism, a convergence mechanism. We work as one. Let me round it off by saying the mantra of disaster response is society as one, responding as one, government as one. Can the national government say that the cyclone is in the X state and disaster response is a state subject, so the nation is not going to be involved and NDRF need not be sent? You remember, and you can see that NDRF is there everywhere, in spite of the fact that we are not even requisitioned on paper. because it has been clearly understood between us that even if they call or don't call, go there, because it is a nation's disaster. We are facing it as one team, Team India. So I would appeal to FICCI to be part of that Team India and disaster response in every way. And NDRF is willing to put up its hand and actually collaborate with FICCI to get the private sector into the disaster response culture. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you so very much, Shri Pradhan, for your almost very inspiring, as I would say. And I think we've noted down some very, very important issues and critical inputs and feedbacks and signals which have come out. And I think we assure you and we promise you that we would take it up on an immediate basis, and we will set up a meeting and with you and your office and your team to how we can work together in this very area which you very rightly highlighted. Community resilience is the golden subject. That is what which will drive the development of this country also, if the communities are resilient towards disaster. And I think a point well taken, sir. And I think thank you so much for giving us that push, that nudge from an industry's perspective of joining hands with the government, with agencies like NDRF and others to work towards the common goal of communities. Thank you so much again, Mr. Pradhan. Really appreciate your address. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on now, I would like to request Dr. Mrityunjay Mohapatra, Director General of Meteorology, Indian Meteorological Department, Ministry of Earth Sciences, for his special address. Before I request he has over 80 research publications to his credit. He's Director of National Weather Forecasting Center, which is formerly, which was the Northern Hemispheric Analysis Center, New Delhi from 2005 to 2010. Scientist E, NWFC, 2010 to 2015, Weather Forecasting and Cyclone Warning Disaster Management. During Scientist F, from 15 to 16, Weather Forecasting, Numerical Weather Prediction and Cyclone Warning Disaster Management. And a Scientist G, IMD, which is the current department, weather forecasting, numerical weather prediction, and severe weather warning disaster management. On that note, sir, I would now request Dr. Mrityunjay Mohapatra for his special address. Over to you.
Your audio is muted.
Yeah, fine. Namaskar. Thank you very much, Mr. Wah. Honorable Minister of State, Sri Nitin Rasha, all distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I congratulate and thank FICCI and NIDM for considering this subject for this conclave. As many speakers so far have spoken about the various impacts of the cyclones and its importance with respect to our socioeconomic growth in the society, I will just stress upon that the tropical cyclones is a worldwide natural hazard. It is one within three, the most important disaster occurring in the world. It is the one among the three, the most important disaster which causes the maximum loss of lives in the world. Considering Indian scenario, the Asian region, South Asian region is prone for this particular disaster. And we have got the notorious record of maximum loss of lives due to cyclones in this area. In 1970, the cyclone which crossed near Bhola, Bangladesh, caused the death of more than 300,000 lives. In recent years, in 2008, one cyclone Nargis caused 140,000 deaths in Myanmar. And as many of the speakers told, in recent years, we have been able to minimize the loss of lives. And there is no cyclone crossing any coast within India or in the Bay of Bengal in Arabian Sea region, where the death toll has gone beyond 100 in recent years. So it isn't possible because of an integrated approach of Government of India and the concerned state governments in the coast. If you look at the various aspects of the cyclone management for disaster reductions, basically deals with the assessment of hazardness, vulnerability, exposures, and the risk. Then comes the preparedness and planning, early warning for the cyclones, prevention, and mitigation approaches. So to carry out all this, there has been an evolving mechanism with respect to the policy and planning. At the highest level, the cyclone management is taken off by the Honorable Prime Minister himself, followed by Honorable Home Minister and our Minister of State for Home. I am happy to share here, during each and every cyclone so far, the highest authority of the country has been involved for its mitigation and management to reduce the risk. I am further happy to share that we have been blessed in each and every cyclone. Our beloved Minister of State for Home, Sri Nitin Rai Sahab, contacts us. Personally, he contacts me and he contacts NDRF and takes stock of the situation and guides us for various actions during the disaster itself, cyclone itself. Similarly, if you go to the central and state level, we have got well established the policy and planning in terms of the national disaster management authorities, state disaster management authorities, district disaster management authorities. Also, we have got the national disaster management plan, state disaster management plan, district disaster management plan. To carry out the day-to-day work, we have got the synergized standard operating procedures, which is followed very efficiently with the first meeting taken by the Cabinet Secretary once the information is given by the India Meteorological Department. National Crisis Management Committee meets once the warning is issued by India Meteorological Department. So with the guidance of Cabinet Secretary, all the line departments which are directly or indirectly affected by the cyclones and which are involved in the mitigation of the cyclone impacts meet on daily basis and plan for immediate planning. So apart from that, there is a lot of response mechanism from government agencies, from the state, similarly, under the guidance of Honorable Chief Ministers, and also the Chief Secretaries. Meeting takes place on daily basis, where IMD provides its information. You'll be happy to know that even the last cyclone Amphan, Honorable Prime Minister conducted the review meeting, Honorable Home Minister conducted the review meeting with the Honorable Chief Ministers of the concerned state and the early warning agencies and disaster management agencies at the national level. So that gives an additional force, motivation to the people working in the field of cyclone management. Apart from that, the various agencies, the various sectors which are affected, if you look at the response of these sectors and people have increased. Even though I agree with Pradhan Saab that there is varied response from state to state, but overall, over the country, if you look back from 1999 and if you look at now, there has been manifold increase in response from all the sectors to minimize this loss of lives and property. So as a result, the loss of lives could be minimized with the zero casualty approach of all concerned state government and central government. The problem is at present that loss of property. Just like in other parts of the world, the loss of property is increasing over the years. It is basically because of the fact that the socio-economic condition of the country is improving like the world. And once there is approaching a cyclone, you can expect the more losses of properties. But still now the scientists are discussing about the ways and means by which we can minimize the loss of property. So long back, therefore, India Meteorology Department thought about it and started with the impact-based forecast. So as and when IMD issues a bulletin, it clearly mentions about the type of damaging impacts which are expected with respect to trees, with respect to various types of houses, with respect to irrigation, with respect to water, with respect to agriculture, with respect to power sector, with respect to health, etc. Because the tropical cyclone is a multi-hazard associated with directly the primary hazards of heavy rainfall, winds, and storm surges or tidal waves. But it has got secondary hazards like floods and landslides. It is the tertiary hazards like health issues, drinking water issues. So therefore, while you have got the simultaneous primary hazards, also you have got the secondary and tertiary hazards over a period of time. So therefore, the preparedness is required before, during, and after tropical cyclones affecting the country. And accordingly, actions are taken up, and accordingly, we have to assess the impacts. Further, I just want to mention that if you look at worldwide and also in the country, the coastal region is more developed. Many of the industries are established in coastal region. So therefore, the gross domestic product, if you just look at in the coastal area, is quite high. So therefore, there is potential threat to these properties. So I'm happy that this conclave is taking care of the resilience of the industries, infrastructure, and communities. India Meteorology Department specifically issues the warning to all the industries along the coast and all the infrastructure, major infrastructure, including railways, national highways, airports. But still then, what we find actually, the losses are not minimized. So for this purpose, there are two approaches. One is the structural approach. Other one is the non-structural approach. IMD being an early warning service provider, it goes for the non-structural approach. We can have the improved impact-based forecasting that we are taking up. Already, all might have known that a digital decision support system for impact assessment, impact loss, and its forecast has been developed with the leadership of National Disaster Management Authority, with participation of India Meteorology Department and many MOES institutes. It is ready now. It can provide more granular information about the impact of the cyclones in different watersheds, in different districts, and different villages. It has the digital data with respect to various types of houses, roads, railways, infrastructures, industry, and also the hospitals, cyclone shelters, etc. Also, it takes care of the geospatial information. It has the provision to have the dissemination information in a useful manner where people and all the disaster managers can utilize it. But the thing is that the data, the digital data which is utilized, it is based on mainly on the census data. So we have to have a regular update on this digital data and geospatial information so that every year we should have an updated information with this decision support system which can be utilized. Because as you know, the infrastructure, the industry, and the community capacity changes very rapidly, dynamically over the period of time. So therefore, this data set has to be updated very frequently with authenticated, qualitative data so that the system can be more effective. So apart from that, to improve the resilience, we need to have the improvement in awareness, as Pradhan Sir was telling, in each and every community, so that they can minimize the losses. And at the government level, also we have to improve this awareness and preparedness and our capacity to minimize the losses. I hope the exercise of impact-based forecasting, which is being taken up by India Meteorology Department with support from national authorities and state authorities to cater to the each and every requirement, will help in future. Certainly, we have been facing this challenge. We have minimized the loss of life, and I am sure in years to come, we can minimize the loss of properties. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mrityunjay Mohapatra, for your very detailed and very to the point address. And I must congratulate you. And I think that we all, as community, as people of this country, rely very heavily on IMD's on predictions. And I think we've been very fortunate to have such a state-of-the-art setup in your organization, which is helping us with early warning, with preparations to deal with any extreme weather situation, especially cyclone. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohapatra, for your address. Quickly moving on. Now we have, ladies and gentlemen, the keynote address by none other than Honorable Member, National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India, Shri Rajendra Singh. Quickly, before I request Mr. Singh for his keynote address, his prior appointment, prior to his appointment as NDMA member, he was at the top post of Indian Coast Guard from February 2016 to 2019. A resident of Dehradun, DG Rajendra Singh joined Indian Coast Guard in 1980. During his 39 long years of service, the flag officer consolidated the administrative framework and laid foundation for expansion of the organization in terms of capacity building, manpower, and infrastructure. During DG, he concurrently served as chairman of National Maritime Search and Rescue Board, chairman of the National Oil Spill Disaster Contingency Plan, very important from a disaster management perspective, and National Competent Authority to support oil spill response in the waters of Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. Further, in regards to his expertise in disaster management, effective measures and policies were instituted during his tenure, which minimized the loss of property and life in wake of tsunami floods and multiple cyclones, which has affected the Indian coastal region. On that note, I would request Shri Rajendra Singh for his keynote address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ruhab. Good afternoon, everybody. Honorable Dinaraja Mantriji, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon once again. It's a great honor to be part of this webinar on fostering cyclone resilience in industry, infrastructure, and community. All the previous speakers from NIDM, from NDRF, from IMD have already spoken so many things about what all we are doing. But I'll keep it short. The history of human existence has taught us how the humanity, despite many natural setbacks, continued to spring back to its feet time and again. The Mother Earth, through its own noble ways, recuperates itself in various forms. The human race has withered and thrived through many disasters, and such untethered and adaptable spirit form the basic tenet of the humanity. Responsive to change is what makes us the most advanced and intelligent beings on the planet Earth, and also the prime reason for our survival since eons. India always has faced with various natural disasters since time immemorial. The large coastline of 7,516 kilometers, cyclones have marred the nation's demography in quite an impactful way. The super cyclone, which swept the Odisha coast in 1990, was one of the most ravaging disasters to hit the country. It affected 15 million people and more than 2 million households in the state, where the 10,000 people lost their life and 4 lakh livestock. Community was confronted with the fact that seriously achieved development result can be wiped off within a few seconds, leaving behind almost nothing but death and destruction. The example of super cyclone, although exceptional in magnitude, is not isolated case. The examples reveals that cyclone, apart from provoking human distress, seriously undermine the result of development investment in a very short time, and therefore remains a major impediment to sustainable development and poverty eradication. Cyclone caused catastrophe in coastal area due to the high wind speed, heavy rainfall, storm surge, and flood that accompany them. India has a coastline that I said 7,500, out of which 5,700 kilometer coastline exposed to severe cyclone. But after the Odisha cyclone, in 1999, the government of India initiated the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, so-called NCRMP. The NCRMP Phase 1 was initiated in Odisha and Andhra Pradesh in 2011 and was finished in 2018 with a cost of 2,541 crore. The erection of disaster management infrastructure for mitigation and risk reduction in coastal area, such as multipurpose cyclone shelter for housing the vulnerable, houseless, poor and needy during the cyclone, laying of network of roads, and where required, bridges for people to easily flee before landfall of cyclone, and subsequently to use these for rescue and relief operation. Early warning dissemination system was also included in the project. These measures help us, and we can see in the 2013 when Fallen has stuck, 2014 when Hudud was taken place, and in 2019 in Fani, and 2020 we have seen Amphan, where the loss suffered in terms of human animal lives was very, very minimal, even in single digit. The government of India decided to further initiate mitigation and risk reduction measures to tackle such losses. Components of taking electrical infrastructure underground, they're called underground cabling, helping people to have cemented roof, resistance to wind speed up to 300 km/h, raising of coastal shelter belt of tree species, and protected coastal agriculture and horticulture from strong winds, conserving mangroves and planting of these for protection from coastal erosion was made part of NCRMP 1. In addition, the NCRMP 2 with all components of Phase 1 with the outlay of 2,691 crore was started in Gujarat, Goa, Karnataka, Kerala, and Maharashtra, and with West Bengal. Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry was covered through the World Bank aided emergency tsunami reconstruction project. In short, I'll give you in Phase 1, Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, we got 535 multi-purpose cyclone shelter, 1,086 kilometer roads were built, 34 bridges was made, and 88 kilometer saline embankment was constructed. In Phase 2, 292 multi-purpose cyclone shelter has been built. This program was started in 2016 and is going to over in March 2021. The risk reduction measures have been initiated as a solution to mitigate, to reduce the risk emanating from natural disasters. However, a lot has to be done to improve our resilience toward cyclone, especially on industrial infrastructure and community front. The most common definition of resilience is capacity to bounce back or rebound. Resilience is the context of critical infrastructure is defined as the ability of facility or asset to anticipate, resist, absorb, respond to, adapt to, and recover from a disturbance. A sustainable city or a country as a network of physical systems and human communities is capable of managing extreme events. During disaster, both must be able to survive and function under extreme stress. Furthermore, in an urban context, a city can be called resilient when its physical infrastructure and community is robust and flexible instead of brittle and fragile. The transition from critical infrastructure protection to critical infrastructure resilience is brought by the changes in the risk landscape and uncertainties. A multi-spectral system approach is important for building the resiliency of critical infrastructure to engage stakeholders in design, investment, construction, ownership, operation, or regulations. Here, I would like to mention the three major parts that NDMA is working on. One is preparedness for any eventualities. Two, policy making and regulatory function. And three, as an owner or operator of infrastructure. To deliver strategy 2020 Sendai framework, building disaster and climate resilience must be prioritized, while at the same time bringing about prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable development. Thus, a shift in focus is required. To achieve this, an advanced holistic resilience approach to be conceptualized and formulated. The aim is to build climate change and disaster resilience from 4K perspective: physical infrastructure resilience, financial resilience, eco-based resilience, and social and instrumental resilience. Resilience will be delivered at all levels to individual, household, communities, businesses, and nation. The holistic approach in the broader context of sustainable development encompasses a number of priorities. First, the climate change and disaster risks should be taken into account when planning, designing, and building infrastructure projects. Second, there should be a greater emphasis on biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of an overall strategy of helping people. Three, there should be a focus on human and social dimension of climate and disaster resilience. Finally, is the financial management of residual disaster risk by countries, businesses, and communities. Industrial infrastructure and resilience is important in terms of both hard measures such as upgrading to proper standard, and also for the soft measure, which include policy, regulations, governance, knowledge management, training, capacity building, and so on. An integration of cyclone risk measure with development planning is inescapable for effectively reducing disaster risk and making disaster effort sustainable. To conclude, it is imperative for India coastal region to build a resilient infrastructure and adopt the new normal in the climate constrained world. Economic losses have to be estimated, taking into account the livelihood loss apart from the damage to infrastructure. The examination of the impact of the cyclone have paved us the way to learn lessons from previous disasters and minimize the losses of life. However, property loss and damage of infrastructure facilities is still an impediment in the development of our country. Therefore, there's a requirement for investment in disaster resilient infrastructure, which will help in avoiding the cost of rebuilding by accepting the new normal or build back better of cyclone prone area. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rajendra Singh ji, for your very enlightening and meaningful keynote address. We've noted on a few very important aspects which you mentioned in your keynote address, and we will look forward as FICCI and as private sector to work with you closely in times to come and building a better resilient community in the nation. Thank you so much again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come when we do a formal inauguration through the inaugural address of our Honorable Minister of State, Shri Nityanand Rai ji, Minister of State for Home Affairs in the Government of India. बहुत धन्यवाद सर आपका हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए. It means a lot to us. Thank you for your encouragement. This means a lot for you, and it also shows how important this subject is, not only for the ministry but for the entire country. Before I invite Shri Nityanand Rai ji for his inaugural address, a brief profile, although he needs no introduction, but Shri Rai did his BA honors from the RN Degree College of Baba Saheb Bhimrao Ambedkar University. Shri Rai, who was interested in social work from student life, started doing some very impactful social work in 1982. Honorable Minister has undertaken some groundbreaking social work initiatives in Bihar, especially for girl, child and orphans. He has been involved actively in the polio eradication drive as well. Shri Rai joined his current party BJP in 1990 and began to work from panchayat level. In 2000, he was elected MLA from Bihar for Bihar Assembly from Hajipur Assembly constituency and elected as the first time MP from Udaipur, Bihar in 2014. Member of Standing Committee on Agriculture and then Commerce. In 2015, Shri Rai has been member of Joint Committee on Land Acquisitions, Rehabilitation and Right to get Appropriate Compensation for Relocation and Transparency. Thank you so much again, मंत्री जी. हम आपसे निवेदन है आप इनॉग्रेट कीजिए इस कॉन्फ्रेंस को अपने एड्रेस के साथ. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
धन्यवाद. आज के इस कार्यक्रम में उपस्थित फिक्की के सेक्रेटरी जनरल श्रीमान दिलीप चिन्नॉय जी, एनडीएमए के सदस्य श्रीमान राजेंद्र सिंह जी, एनडीआरएफ के महानिदेशक श्री एसएन प्रधान जी, आईएमडी के महानिदेशक डॉक्टर मृत्युंजय महापात्र जी, एनआईडीएम के कार्यकारी निदेशक मेजर जनरल मनोज कुमार जिंदल जी, नेशनल रिमोट सेंसिंग सेंटर इसरो के निदेशक डॉक्टर श्रीमान राजकुमार जी, चेयरमैन सीआईडीएम फिक्की लेफ्टिनेंट जनरल डॉक्टर जे.आर. भारद्वाज जी, विज्ञान और प्रौद्योगिकी विभाग सिप के एडवाइजर और हेड डॉक्टर देवप्रिया दत्त जी, उपस्थित और इस कार्यक्रम में सम्मिलित सभी देवियों और सज्जनों, फिक्की द्वारा केमिकल उद्योग और आपदा प्रबंधन सीआईडीएम के बैनर के तले उद्योगों, बुनियादी संरचना और समुदायों में चक्रवात समुत्थानशीलता को बढ़ावा देने के विषय पर आयोजित इस 3 दिवसीय संगोष्ठी अति महत्वपूर्ण संगोष्ठी है. आपदा जोखिम न्यूनीकरण से जुड़ी संयुक्त राष्ट्र की विभिन्न एजेंसियों एनडीएमए, एनडीआरएफ, एनआईडीएम, भारत मौसम विभाग, विज्ञान और विभाग, नेशनल रिमोट सेंसिंग सेंटर, भारतीय तट रक्षक जैसे भारत सरकार के प्रमुख संगठनों तथा विद्युत वित्त उत्पादन वितरण प्रबंधन से जुड़े विशेषकर देश के तटीय राज्यों में कार्यरत अनेक सार्वजनिक क्षेत्रों के निकायों, निगमित इकाइयों, आपदाओं तथा जोखिम अंतरण से संबंध भारतीय और विदेशी गैर जीवन बीमा एजेंसियों, सभी राज्य सरकारों तथा प्रथम प्रक्रिया दाता एजेंसियों तथा तटीय क्षेत्रों में उद्योगों को आपातकालीन सेवाएं प्रदान करने वाले देश तथा विदेश से आए प्रतिष्ठित विशेषज्ञों की इस सभा में सम्मिलित होने के लिए मैं सभी को बधाई देता हूं. परिसंपत्तियों की एक जगह पर एकत्रित होने के कारण हमारे देश में बहु जोखिम प्रभाव से ग्रसित अनेक क्षेत्र हैं. जैसा हम जानते हैं कि भारत प्राकृतिक और मानव निर्मित जोखिमों की एक विस्तृत श्रृंखला के प्रति भी संवेदनशील है तथा प्रत्येक आपदा के परिणाम स्वरूप जोखिम के प्रति संवेदनशील भी. वसुधैव कुटुंबकम, वर्ल्ड वन फैमिली हमारा मूल मंत्र है और आपदा जोखिम को कम करने के प्रति भारत प्रतिबद्ध भी है. आप सबों को याद होगा कि भारत के माननीय प्रधानमंत्री आदरणीय नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने डिजास्टर रिजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के गठन का बीड़ा उठाया और सितंबर 23, 2019 को न्यूयॉर्क शहर में आयोजित यूएन क्लाइमेट 2019 डिजास्टर रिजिलिएंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर हेतु एक वैश्विक संगठन की घोषणा की। CDRI राष्ट्रीय सरकारों, यूएन एजेंसियों तथा कार्यक्रमों, बहुपक्षीय विकास बैंकों, प्राइवेट सेक्टरों, शिक्षा संस्थानों
of things to describe on this aspect, but we have not yet taken up these things at the war footing. And any economic feasibility assessment done so far, it is being done, and I will show some report which are available elsewhere in the foreign organizations, and where we supply this data, and they come in a very nicely that what are the categorical damage and loss that we are facing. Of course, long back, the report was that we lose 2% of our GDP every year, but I will show you many such accounts about the recent report came in. As far as stemming or taking care of heavy rainfall induced slopes or even coastal area which are getting inundated or being eroded away, nature has given us some solution that how it is to be taken care of. It is the grass that which takes care of, or even erosion control in our coastal area or across the country, wherever erosion is there, how locally using our Manrega worker, this is West Bengal example, that how nicely nature has taken care of and using Manrega worker. And so this is what we have to note it, that how many trillions we are losing, but how many trillions we can save by taking care of these local measures which nature has given to us. So now just only coming back to over the last 20 years report, it shows that so many accounts are there through EMDAT, that in total seen in figure 1, which is coming up, we have approximately 1.23 million lives on an average 60,000 per year, and affected a total of 4 billion people. So these are all report generated, and you see that a decade before 1980 to 99 and 2000 to 19, if we see that we are going in a developmental economy with Sendai framework on which is going on, and with a lot of such sustainable development goals that which are in action now till 2030. So when we see that this kind of database that a decade before and just last decade, how these are increasing. So these are all total deaths, total affected, economic losses in terms of US dollar. Or even if we say human cost of disaster in the last two decades, you can also see that total disaster event type 1980 to 99 versus this, these reports are freely downloadable and managed and procured and available in the internet free that by these organizations. And also number of disaster reported per country. Here India is also part, because we supply this data, they procure them and put it in this form, and then we can see that how they are. And these are all available. This data is downloadable in an Excel file, and so we can see number of people affected decade before and last decade, that which are all in a much more. So taking sustainable development goals, all the 17 goals there, and we all have noted many reports, research papers are coming out every moment. But the past 4 years have been the warmest on records. So there are many such record-breaking things are happening. Land degradation continues unchecked, and 1 million plant and animal, which we think that we should take care of this thing, plant and animal species are at the risk of extinction. So, and some of the midterm evaluation report, especially goal 9,
where build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation, which is relevant to the theme of cyclone resiliency, especially. And then when just last year in 2019, that the report which has brought out that we are too slow. So we have to look at, while all the industries who are participant here, we have to look at this database which are being generated, which are alarming, even though 1 decade is remaining. But this 5 years of data is showing that we are still going slow. And at the same time, when again there are some data, especially about the flood, storm, and drought, what a contrast they are. You see, drought and flood and cyclone together, that which is causing that with this increasing trend that which is taking place here, that it is as we are going towards, it is increasing, and it is increasing trend. And so in order to minimize this damage and in order to see this, minimize this loss, it is not that how many insurance or reinsurance company are giving insurance to that based on certain models and certain specifications, certain things, but we have to incorporate these things into our developmental perspectives. So, and then damage also, you can see that as we are 2000 up to 2016 here, or every year this data is going, and it is going and going and increasing. So whether it is biological, whether it's geophysical, whether it is meteorological, where we are concerned over here. So they are all increasing trend as from 1960s or in the current industry that we have made onward, 1980 onward. So these are all trend. And even we talk, which is a technological type, database for 100 plus years shows that, database for 100 plus years shows that we are really must be concerned about that what is happening over the globe or over the region or even locally. Especially today's concern is about our cyclone resilient infrastructures and industries that which are there within 100 kilometer from the coastal area of the country. So again, there are certain things that I want to highlight quickly, that the year that was 2019, since 1851, with an average temperature hovering this degrees Celsius above the 20th century average. So it is almost 1 degree above the 20th century average. There are lots of databases that you can look into. The economic loss due to severe weather events and droughts during these, of course, these are all being catapulted. I have shown you some of these examples that. And 5 of the 10 costliest disasters of 2019 were flood related. Spring and summer flooding in the USA, and separate seasonal monsoon in China and our country, or major flood in Iran. So this you can see, and globally, the insured loss, especially here, there is a special session here. Insured loss is even insured loss, 71 billion. And with Japan hit by 2 devastating typhoon, accounting for 15 billion alone in insurance events. So, but the insured losses from the natural disaster in 2019 were significantly lower than the record 157 in the 2-3 years before. So these are all databases are available, and economic loss to the country, especially in India, due to destructive monsoon, and especially where a cyclone Fani resulted in a cumulative loss of these things. So all these database again that it is respect to the country and the world. Aon, the global professional firm which brings this database, taking from each and every member countries. And of course, there will be a separate session to indicate that how much we are compared to what is happening in other ways. Here, our cyclone speed are limited to 200 or 220 kilometers per hour, whereas in this area, Western Pacific, or in this area, Atlantic, they may go even more than 300 kilometers, 350 kilometers, highest it has been recorded. So whatever code and design and infrastructure that we are making, the impact on that or similar infrastructure. We have to look at even higher gust wind that which are experienced elsewhere, but 100+ years of history, we are seeing that in the last 1 decade or it is all exceeding. And so that way, I wanted to show that this overview of tropical cyclone is shown. Various databases are available. We are still confined to this one, but we have made all these publications available. And then vulnerability atlas also made, which are highlighted. So industry, which are concentrated here, or that area that which are flood prone area, these are already highlighted here. So whenever we are going to make a coastal or coastal belt area, any construction industry, these are the base map that available and generated by BMTPC that we must look into. And so before and after, of course, and all these things that which are going on, we have got lots of things, information minute to minute, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and even in mobile phone, they are coming and very advanced way. But information wise, we have made a significant step, but bringing industry and industrial facilities and their losses that we have to minimize, taking into this data that which are available. So just only the key points or recommendation. The temperature increase, of course, there are many such increase in frequency of potentially high impact of natural hazards across the world. This could render current national and local strategy for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation obsolete in many countries. There are many research reports are coming in the last 1 decade that these are all changing in the last 1 century average that which was predicted in 2007 in IPCC report. These are all getting changed, and in the last 1 decade or so, everything is getting changed. And shifting rainfall pattern and other things, and 70% global agriculture, the rain-fed, and 1.3 billion people dependent on degrading natural agricultural land. The considerable impact due to single disaster type in some countries provide an opportunity for more focused disaster risk reduction. Of course, COVID-19 demonstrated a lot. And so I have taken it from CRED report that there is a requirement for strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk with clear vision, competence, plans, guidelines, funding, which we have seen. Public and private investment, especially in disaster risk prevention and reduction through structural and non-structural, needs to be stepped up to create disaster resilient societies. So these are the things, of course, my next speaker is going to, Professor Murthy is going to highlight, but only thing is that the erection and use of cyclone risk mitigation infrastructure is proving to be an important element in disaster resilience under present circumstances and need to be taken up at war footing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chandan Ghosh, for your very detailed presentation. I think you've touched upon some very important points which you have done, which has a lot, years of experience into that. And we continue to learn from you. And I think we would, on this very subject of cyclone resilience and resilient infrastructure, I think this is just the beginning of us working more closely. And we commit fully from FICCI's side, from industry side, from the private sector side, to be of use, to be of a position to contribute to the cause. Thank you so much. Moving on quickly, I would like to welcome, before I call, I would like to welcome our eminent speakers, and also to begin with Shri Kamal Kishorji, who's the Honorable Member of National Disaster Management Authority. He will be chairing our next session. Thank you so much, Kamalji, for joining us. Welcome Animesh from UNDR, Ardito from UNESCO, and Devajit Das from Igenedo. Welcome to all of you. Next speaker now, I would request Dr. CVR Murthy, Professor IIT Madras. Again, a very renowned personality in the area of structural engineering in the country, not only in the country, but in the region and global. Well, Doctor of Philosophy, Civil Engineering from California Institute of Technology, US. a Master of Technology in Civil Engineering 1986 from IIT Madras itself, and BTech from IIT as well. He's a visiting professor of Department of Civil Engineering in IIT Hyderabad, Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Kanpur. He was professor from 2003 to 2010. Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Madras in 1986 and 87 as well. So he's come back to this very coveted and very renowned institute, IIT Madras. Over to you, Dr. CBR Murthy, and looking forward to your presentation, sir.
Thank you, Rubab. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My pointed agenda this afternoon is to raise some issues that are related to building cyclone resistance in structures of the Indian industries, especially along the coastline. I'm keen on looking at the design of new structures as well as retrofit of existing structures. So quickly, some basics, and then effects of wind and effects of water on structures. Industrial structures come in all sizes and shapes, and they are not structures but subsystems. These subsystems are connected together to make one industry. Each of them in its own has its own peculiarities and specialities, and we require to reflect that in the design. What we generally notice is that the industrial structures are very massive and very stiff, and they're also, some of them are very light and very slender. But what is most crucial is too many assumptions are made in design engineering, and finally there are huge number of connections whose efficacy is what is under question at this point of time. Also, when you look at the spectrum of all the structures built in the country, I would say Indian industry will stand at number 3 after nuclear power plants and dams. And so that is a level of dignity or respect that we attribute to the structures of the Indian industry, because just now the Honorable Minister has said that keeping the employment intact, even when disasters, even when hazards are realized into events, is the key challenge that we have. So some basics on cyclone resistant design. First off, we know the cyclone occurrence map of India, and we're looking at speeds of 170 kilometers per hour stated on the east coast especially. What is important is to recognize that the peak wind speeds are up to 250 and 300 kilometers per hour, but what is used in design is on a 3-second average, what are the issues? So we are looking at cyclones causing both wind effects as well as water effects on structures. Wind is to be looked at very carefully. Depending on the geometry of the structure, the wind forces will change, and so that requires very special attention. And water, of course, traditional treatments are being used liberally, but what is most important from water point of view is to keep away from it, or keep the water away from the structures in water. So the strategies to mitigate the effects of wind are the ones that I'll share a little bit here. The wind speeds considered in the design process are 200 kilometers per hour. These are the 3-second average values that we use. But the gusts that are experienced are much larger than that, more than 200. So what it calls for is that it is time for us to relook at the wind zone map of India and also the wind speed values. Especially with the occurrence of large number of events in 99 onwards, we need to re-examine the subject with great care. And so the first agenda item for industries to push for is to look for an improved seismic wind zone map of India. These wind zone maps are typically prepared by the Bureau of Indian Standards, so the industry should actually push for the BIS to seek a revision in the wind map of India. Second is the Earth's surface affects the speed of wind, and especially green cover. And so we have to bring that into our planning strategy, and we'll reflect on that again. An additional factor of 1.3 is provided whenever structures are required in the post-cyclone environment. So that is the first way that we are trying to address by increasing the design force in structures. Also, there's another importance factor of about 8% increase in force attributed for structures on the coastline. So in all, about 35% increase is what we're looking at. But what cannot be coded in the Indian standards is the peculiarity of the wind flow around different structures of sizes and shapes that I showed you just now. Each of them has its own special geometry. What happens is when wind blows on the structure, there is a impact that is created on the backside of that structure, and that is the wake of the structure, which actually is responsible for the heavy forces that the structure is subjected to. Also, what you notice sometimes is the structures that are adjoining these in the shadow of the building will experience a very strange behavior, and that is where the design of smaller structures adjoining the big structures is of major importance. And so the big brother has a great influence on the design of the younger, chota, smaller structures. And interestingly, all of this cannot be put into the design code. So what we require is competent engineers who can capture this without having to be told that there is a problem. And what we also notice is industrial structures can be so flimsy and flexible that even a small error, either in the design or in the construction, can lead to catastrophic collapses. And we have seen a large number of that in the Indian industry. So experience over time showed that you cannot stack up these structures one behind the other so closely, and that you need to separate them away. So what it brings us to is the need for a master planning of the industrial campuses from two standpoints. One is structural safety standpoint, which I talked about. Wind, when it blows on one structure, affects the adjoining structure. That is one issue. Also, the impact of damage of one or collapse of one should not really affect the other. And so structural safety is one. And then disaster management point of view, we need to see how to isolate these incidents without affecting others. The most effective way and practical way of trying to mitigate the effects of wind on structures is by using tree cover, and tree cover on the foreground. And it is understood that if the height is h, up to 3h, there has been a great relief in the wind pressures that are generated. And so, but sometimes when you plant these trees with gaps between them, that can be again a troublesome spot. So we have to be very careful when we plant these trees. We need to provide these gaps sometimes essentially, but we have to be careful that these are used only for certain specific applications, and that too with the knowledge. And so the intensities can drop up to about 30% to 60%, depending on the level of tree cover that we have used. So once again, a master planning issue on the direction of the cyclonic wind from which it is coming, and where the trees should be placed, in what orientation, what dimension, what size and shape. Having said that, even the structures themselves actually affect each other. And that also has to be studied through computational fluid dynamics. If you have a very large industry whose investment is running into tens of thousands of crores, this cost of 1 crore of doing a computational fluid dynamics analysis is actually pittance for the safety of the entire campus. And this is what a competence that is very rare in the Indian civil engineering industry. It's used extensively in the aerospace industry, but not so much in the civil engineering industry. And time has come to build a competence in this direction in the country amongst those who are doing civil engineering work. The wake and the overpressure both can be quantified through analytical work, and then we can also do some measurements on the structure. So measurements on top of these structures, existing structures, is crucial for developing newer standards, and that is a pathway we have to take for cyclone resistance. When wind blows in one direction, interestingly, some of the flexible structures swing in the perpendicular direction, and this is called galloping. And this galloping is to be recognized in terms of additional effects of stresses that are induced in the structures. Well, of course, everyone knows about the flutter. When wind blows in one direction, in the same direction, there is an oscillation that is estimable and is done classically. But the transverse direction issue has to be brought in for design of normal structures also. In effect, when you see wind, as the structure becomes more slender and taller, the wind forces are larger. And so anytime you see any facility which is very slender and feeble in terms of light mass and flexibility, we are in great trouble. And so what are these items? First of all, you see all these projecting items are the ones that will be put to a greater level of effects. And secondly, the very light items like the sheeting that is used to clad buildings either on the side face or on the vertical, on the roofs of, both of them have the likelihood of being pulled off or pushed in depending on the level of forces. What is important to recognize is that the wind forces are 2 to 3 times larger than the gravity forces. That means this is a very severe loading, and this needs to be recognized in design and done very, very carefully. Whatever you design for the self weight or gravity load, you have to design 3 times that in the horizontal direction for this wind effects in the extreme case. So this is something that it depends on the size of the structure, it depends on geometry of the structure, it depends on the flexibility of the structure. But notwithstanding that, the fact that this is serious has to be recognized. And I say this with emphasis because today we don't have a standard that really gives us deeper insights into all of this. While there is a standard for wind code, it is very, very introductory in nature, but doesn't talk about detailed industrial structures. So industries should now come together and form a standard that will be used for the design of structures to resist cyclonic conditions. Now, the wind effects have to be treated at 2 levels, one at the whole structure level as well as individual structural elements level. Individual elements because their pressure variations change depending on the position with respect to the wind direction. And that is where we see a large number of failure modes, which are either overturning or local crushing that we have, or lateral sliding and so on. These are all avoidable. And interestingly, countries like Australia and America have really developed detailed guidelines, especially for housing. They have done that, especially for buildings, they have done that. For industrial structures also, they have a number of guidelines, and we could take advantage of that to start with and eventually build our own specific country-specific documents. So uplifting, whenever you see that, you need to anchor them, and there are now commercial anchors available to hold structures down, whatever size, shape, and geometry of the structure we are talking about. Or you need to make the structure more robust, use reinforced concrete or heavier masses to anchor the structure. Sliding is a major issue, especially when the base dimension is very small and the structure is made of very light material and weak material. Suction is the biggest concern that we have in industry today, because the facade glass and the facade material that we come up with, we need to test it full scale under heavy pressure in real wind tunnels, and then only we should be able to qualify these materials for use along the coastal areas. Otherwise, we will see time and again these materials being pulled off either from the horizontal surfaces or from the roof surfaces, and it can cause a greater loss and threat to the life also in industrial environments. And this seeks a full-scale testing facility in the country for wind pressure. I'm saying this because we don't have enough wind tunnels in the country which do full-scale testing. Usually they are academic size, 1 meter and 2 meter sizes, but that's not what is sufficient here. We need much larger facilities, and we need to build, at least this nation deserves a couple of them, at least north, south, east, west, center, 5 of them at least it needs to make the structures safer. Now, having said that, what I talked about so far is actually called defiant design. That means whatever is the force, we'll design for it. But there's another strategy which is called compliant design, and that is the strategy of fuses. So we know of fuses in electrical circuits. Whenever the overcurrent happens, the fuse blows. Very good. So what we could do is, we have a building and then excessive pressure, wind pressure comes in and causes the roof to be lifted off. So instead of making the roof lift off, we can release that pressure off like the pressure cooker valve that we have. And so we can use a larger number of them if the structure is big, and diffuse all the pressure that is generated inside the uplift pressure on the roofs. And this will work both for normal functional use, which is exhausting the air under summer conditions, as well as protecting yourself in the winter. Also, vertical surfaces also are having such threats, so we need to provide vertical surfaces also to have such fuses which will dissipate that force out whenever it is required. What is learned over large amount of work is that inclined surfaces can be threatening, and they can cause very, very difficult flow of forces. So best is to see as close to horizontal as possible, and then that is manageable with the help of these air vents, automated vents that I talked about. Profiling of structures is also very crucial. every time we make boxes, and all the boxes have sharp corners, and those sharp corners are not the best friends with wind. And so those sharp corners have to be rounded off. And this is classically talked about in a guideline that we can prepare for cyclone resistant structures. Another strategy that is seen today is that instead of making the structure as a bluff body, blunt, standing against the wind, we can allow the wind to flow through at intermediate levels and thereby reduce the force significantly. A large factor we can drop the force on the structure. So the geometry of the structure that we have plays a special role, not only in the wind effects, but also there's a huge noise. When wind blows at 250 kilometers per hour, 300 kilometers per hour, there's a noise that is created, and that can be avoided by careful design of the geometry of the structure and dissipating away the forces of the wind flows that are there around the structures. Let me talk about effects of mitigating the issues of water. Water, all of us know that it's a lifeline for us, and so we go and build everything close to water. Very good. But what then happens is we need to do this site selection carefully for our industries. Problems of waterlogging in low-lying areas cannot be solved by structural design. It cannot be solved. Like it was said that the buildings, tall buildings cannot be designed for collision with aircrafts. Same story. When cyclonic conditions come and you have a structure on that, we can design for that. But when it comes to low-lying areas and floods, it's not a structural solution. It is a site selection issue. And this has to be done very carefully. Now, there's a contrasting issue. Somebody can even propose that, oh, when there is water logging, I can put it on stilts. Well, if you have earthquakes and cyclones both happening together, like let us say in Orissa, then you can have stilt as a problem for earthquake, and stilt may give you this relief from water point of view, but it can also cause uplift forces to increase on the stilted structures. So we have to be very careful when we blindly choose one hazard and design the structure for that hazard or prepare the structure for that. Source is the main issue. You have to tap the water, prevent the water from entering. Once it enters, it will become a headache for us. So water logging in terms of ponding, this stagnation should be avoided through proper sloping, and you need to have the drainage happening because by the designed roofing slopes. But what is also done is that there's a large number of basements being used in industries, which we should avoid significantly, especially in cyclone prone areas, because water will enter into the basements and that can cause huge embarrassments. While we will continue to protect our foundations from moisture entrance, every engineering material will eventually give up on water. Water is such a fundamental item, it will pass through every civil engineering material that we have in nature. And so we have to be very careful to say that we are waterproof. No, we are not waterproof. We are water resistant up to a certain limit. After that, we are not. So best is to avoid basements, and any amount of money you want to spend in roof treatments has to be spent on sloping the roof and managing. Of course, we will also use some hydrophobic paints and then make sure that waters will slide away quickly in the direction of the slope. So that we will continue to do. But what is clear is if you have a poor drainage, then you'll have to do the cover-up job more frequently, which means that it is recurring cost, huge recurring cost. I will quickly touch on refuge shelters. Refuge shelters have to be built on the coastline and they have to be on elevated ground, especially where there is flooding. But the key point that has to be reflected here is if some people get locked up for 2 days, the sewage system has to work, and which means the septic tanks also have to be elevated in this area. And this is one point that I request should be embedded in the new refuge shelters that are built along the coastline. If there are areas where flooding won't happen, you can keep the septic tank at a lower area, not a problem. But if you are looking at waterlogging, we have no choice. Finally, I'll close by talking about risk assessment. First of all, we need to reassess the wind map of India because the numbers are exceeding in local sense from different events. So we need to re-examine this whole subject because we've done it last many years ago. Second is that the wind pressure monotonic versus dynamic flutter is something that we need to reflect in the design process a little more formally. We need to have a design philosophy for each industry has to set what is the design philosophy of theirs for the different facilities that they have on the campus. They have to tag them red, orange, yellow, and green. and give us a design philosophy for each of them, where they want to place each of these facilities. Once that is done, the design process will then have to be tuned to meet that design expectation. And this is the process of development of standards that we need to do for the industry specifically. While in earthquakes, we allow damage, in cyclone conditions, we don't allow damage. And so we have to design for the full force. So you can't make a mistake in the estimation of the forces. And that is why I was seeking a revision in the wind map of India. Structural design as of now, and the Indian standards, we have one document which is guidelines for improving cyclone resistance of low-rise houses and other small buildings and structures. This is not sufficient for design of industrial structures. And merely having a wind force loading standard IS 875 Part 5 is not sufficient again for us. Part 3 is not sufficient for us. And that is why I'm seeking that we need a detailing code, a design code for the various structures, depending on their geometry and their adjoining structures, how to treat them. While you can leave all of it to the engineers, but the engineering competence has to be built by giving them formal guidelines. So we need actually to build competence in the engineers, give them a closed loop method so that they know what they're designing and what they're giving to the client. And that is what we have to head towards, which means the wind structural engineering requires a greater attention from now on if you want to protect structures from cyclones. While wind science also has to grow, we need to capture what is the wind effects on these structures. The bylaws will have to now start looking at some of them very carefully. Currently, some of the items that are permitted may have to be dropped, and we may have to insist compulsorily a few more items in a certain coastal area which is prone to cyclone conditions. So again, cyclone risk assessment can be done at 4 levels: qualitative 2 levels and quantitative 2 levels. And I think the industry should begin at the quantitative level 3, simple quantitative, and it is possible to do quick calculations and identify which of your structures are under risk at this point of time. While we will over time build all the 4 documents so that the document number 1 will go into bylaws, number 2 will go into design standards, 3 will become the assessment for the industries, and 4 will become the R&D effort for specialized structures. And so we require all 4 of them. Indian industry should come forward and build such a system. And this is where, depending on the category that you would place your structure in, for the severity of the losses, you will have to then put your design standards also tuned accordingly. And so the levels of risk that you will be putting your structure into is known to you when you're running an industry. And so whether you like that risk or you don't like that risk, this is what you have to define as the client owner of the structure of the industry. You need to figure that out. I'll stop here by adding a few thoughts, saying that wind demand has to be understood more carefully and more accurately, and wind capacity has to be understood more accurately. In the designer side, we need to give more support to them in time ahead. We are using a large number of untested and unregulated technologies in the industry just because it is available internationally. It is not proper for a nation of our size to have structures built without a national standard on it. While it is true that we have to encourage new technologies, we should also see a pathway for a fast tracking of the new technologies by full-scale testing and development of standards. No care can be less when we say we want safety in the structure. So pre-engineered buildings will be one of those items that will be worrying me when industries are being discussed from cyclone point of view. So 5 suggestions or 6 suggestions from my side. Site selection has to be very careful. Multi-hazard design is compulsory for us. Providing fuses for wind effects at predetermined locations wherever it is permissible. If not, we have to use those wind exits. And then draining of water on all sides. And then 5, in a model industry cyclone risk mitigation program is what I'm seeking today, because the guidelines came in 2008, and industries need to get a little formal from now on to make sure that there is a camaraderie and that the lessons learned by the bigger industries can be shared with the smaller industries, and thereby there is a sort of a mutual growth of each other. And the national guidelines came in 2008. In Chapter 7, it says we need to do risk assessment through vulnerability analysis, hazard zoning, and mapping, and then generate data and put it on GIS tools so that everybody can get comfortable understanding the impacts and do capacity development. And no better way to start than from the industry, because whatever national cyclone risk mitigation project was focusing largely on what the government should do, and it has done excellent work. But now the industry has to come forward and do its bit and follow Chapter 7 of the guidelines and implement that urgently. And wind speeds, I talked about that. Cyclone risk mitigation projects, we can start with pilots, and 3 industries can come forward, small, medium, and large, and we can implement the mitigation measures and share them and with others, document them and share them with others over time. But what I'm seeing is that if we should start with smaller structures, build confidence, and then do larger structures, that will be the way we want to do. And last item, it hurts to see that competent engineers are dwindling by the day for many reasons and many national level reasons. And that is why I'm saying a special effort has to be put in to train engineers who are working in the industry, who are just degree holders, but they have to be made competent. They're qualified, but they have to be made competent now. And that is the reason why we require a more tighter regulation and enforcement environment in this country, so that we can do good quality control in original construction, and somebody can do nice quality assurance by overseeing that construction, and eventually feed it back to build better engineers in time ahead. So it's time for action and not for just being a spectator on the galleries. Ladies and gentlemen, I will stop here by thanking NDMA, NIDM, FICCI, and the Prime Minister's Office, Economic Affairs Office. In particular, I would like to say my regards to Rubab Sood, who brought me here, and Mainak Majumdar, who made sure that I'm sitting and speaking to you today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so very much, Dr. CVR Murthy. It's always, it's a learning experience. Every time we go through your presentation. I think from a cyclone perspective, I think there are certain, from a structural engineering point of view, you mentioned certain aspects which needs to be undertaken in any sort of planning. It could be from a resilient infrastructure point of view. There are certain commonalities, whether it's cyclone or earthquake or floods or anything for that matter. And I think those points are very well taken. And I think we'll, as I said, it's a great learning experience listening to you every time. And I'm sure there are over 450 participants from not only India, but from the region as well. We have participants from Thailand, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka also. I'm sure they must be getting benefited out of what they are listening to from the experts. Thank you. Quickly on to the next and the last presentation of the session. I would now request Mr. Sharad Tripathi, who is the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Fluidin, a Transoft Group company. Mr. Tripathi, as you know, we are running behind schedule, so I would request you to kindly squeeze your presentation to as much as you can, and obviously share the essence truly with the audience which is present. Over to you, Mr. Tripathi.
Thank you, sir. I will try to limit myself shortly as quickly as possible. In fact, Dr. CVR Murthy has covered quite a few interesting subjects, and that takes out at least prepares the context of what I would like to go into. What I would like to point out also is that I'm sitting here in Paris, and every time I go to India, I'm horrified by the design of the airport terminals and various buildings, which are totally a closed box. And as Dr. Ghosh has pointed out, that especially in the tropical conditions like India, the buildings shouldn't be designed as closed boxes. There needs to be a better fit for the local conditions, and which is somehow missing there. So let me move on. The domain model, I'll emphasize and I'll look into the modeling aspects only. when we look from cyclonic point of view, it is not just one thing, it is multiple things. It is wind, it is flooding, it is the objects which are flying around. It could be the subsequent fire. So it is just not disaster management from one point of view. It has got to be in from multiple issues together. As far as water ingress is concerned, I think that is quite easily manageable now. There is enough technology and enough resources available, and especially things like what happened in Kerala or in other places is easily manageable. I don't think really it's a big issue, and somehow we should get on to do that on a regular basis. So, where I would like to take you to. Let's see if I'm getting this. Okay. All right. Yeah, where I would like to take you to the specific buildings, and especially the subject about the, I think Mr. Pradhan was talking about how the business can be made resilient. It is not the large infrastructure only, it is also the small and large business like hospitals, like airports, like various industries. And there, of course, as Dr. Murthy had pointed out, a very important thing is to look at the effect of the wind. In France here, where I'm sitting here, we have some atmospheric boundary layer wind tunnels, but unfortunately not everyone can go to those wind tunnels. Especially look at the flexible structures. The cost is rather quite huge. Lately I had asked IIT Kanpur, which is my alma mater also, for one single situation it was something like 50-60 lakhs. I'm not really sure that many industries can afford to spend that kind of money. So I would still emphasize very much on CFD, through dynamics modeling, which is very much accessible and feasible now for large and small structures altogether. Technology is available to build over large 50-60 square kilometer area and more. 100 square kilometer is very common. And still look at the details of the buildings. So as wind flow in general, it is essentially means permeability, not the wind which is flowing around only. Flexibility is one thing, but also as the Dr. Chandan Ghosh was pointing out, we need to look at the ventilation. And ventilation is one very critical thing. And somehow I feel that the cost factor, which was coming into the picture again and again, that whether everyone can afford it, if we see it through the energy management as well as the regular ventilation, I feel that the same model can be used for cyclonic effects also. It will be much more palatable if we tell an industry that they can do energy saving by having a proper modeling where the internal and external flows both. And of course, I mean, situations like COVID, like here in France, we are all locked down because it is found that 95% of the transmission is because of the ventilation. In India, it has gone down because right now everyone can walk out and stay outside. But I'm afraid as soon as the air conditioning and the fans and the ACs will start, the transmission will also increase. So somewhere the cost of cyclonic resilience can be associated with the energy and ventilation of the buildings, and that might be more acceptable to the business. Now here I'll take one or two cases and just try to point out what can be done easily without really, and only based on CFD modeling. Here is one large airport building. It is Reunion Island, tropical conditions, which is very different what you will find in Europe usually. It's very open and it has got multiple scope structures, primarily to take care of the tropical stormy conditions, but also we have significantly the internal ingress of the air going into the building, and that is where the whole effort has to be. While the external airflow and in fact the flexibility of the structure by using fluid structure interaction modeling can be done rather without much without great expenses. What is much more important is to identify where the wind ingress into the building and the resilience of the critical equipment through those periods. And that is where I would say a detailed modeling becomes very important, but fortunately that also can be associated with the ventilation itself, and the cost factor can be brought down because it is the same model which can be used for low natural convection and heating or cooling of the internal space, which can be also used for the resilience of the equipment inside. One other factor which also we found is very common in such situations is the subsequent fire, which we can also go into. Usually in such things, important thing is that we should avoid the toxic or flammable leaks. And if there is a leak, how far it might go, especially the tanks and the containment areas. So one thing which has come out when we modeled the Fukushima, we worked very substantially in nuclear buildings. We worked on Fukushima also. Is that we should forget about the modeling only the most damaging scenario, because it is very difficult, and that means essentially very huge cost of tying everything down and practically stopping the whole activity. We really should look into the failure of minor initial equipment, small equipment, and which may lead to some major hazard, which might subsequently follow up, because it's a kind of secondary effect, domino effect. And so instead of just modeling one single scenario, we should model multiple 5-10 scenarios and see what happens if they may lead to something which could be very significant. Why it is important? It is, for example, about the dimensioning of the grills, ventilation grills. This is what initiated the process of accident in Fukushima. In the diesel generator room, the dimensioning grills were, for maintenance reasons, were stopped. They were not functioning, and because of that, the secondary power requirements were not functioning properly, and the secondary support system did not function, and the coolant fell down, and when the coolant fell down, the steam generators fell down, and the fuel elements heated up, and then it led to the hydrogen explosion and the reactor buildings coming down. So it was 3, 4, 5 steps further down the line, but it started by simple dimensioning grills, which is not a big deal. Anyone could have maintained that, but on that specific day for maintenance purposes, they were not functioning. Now, this kind of situation can occur anywhere. So I'll just take this specific case, because for everywhere we need secondary generators, we need support situations. We know that there will be a power failure and we have to keep the building functioning. So very commonly we find generator buildings, and in generator buildings we have this issue that there are multiple entries. We do have to keep ventilating because it is generating toxic fumes. We do have fuel storage also. We have control room also. So quite a few critical things are there. And for the functioning of the whole building or the business, it is important that at least these last resort secondary support systems should keep functioning whatever happens. So this is where I'll just show the kind of modeling which is done. It is that we explored these 3, 4 items, that diesel hole and the bridge which takes the diesel conduits to the battery storage also, and then the fuel storage for the which might lead, sorry, it is written in French, but it means fire, and the local control. So there are warehouses, there are fire containment areas, there are firewalls, the technical control room, batteries. These are multiple critical equipment which have to be saved, but at the same time they have to be exposed to the external conditions, because without ventilation they will not function. And if there is a wind of something like 80 meters per second, as Dr. Moki was saying, about 220 kilometers an hour, then we are in trouble if at all anything fails and these equipments suffer a failure. So, for example, here we went into the modeling of each equipment, structural modeling as well as CFD modeling. Structural modeling for the local resilience, CFD modeling for making some estimation of the pressure and the velocity which may be encountered inside and outside. So this could be done very, I think, without great effort, and the cost wise also, it is not really, we are not looking at anything more than say 10-20 lakhs at best. If we can ensure that these critical equipment where we are looking for example, here we are looking at a Cyclone F4, 84 meters per second, 300 kilometers an hour, and the resilience outside, which gives me the velocity which is coming in, and the pressures which could be generated at the entry levels, the entries and exits. We can see that the pressure variations could be of the order of about 2 to 3 kilopascals easily. And the velocity in and out could be easily, I should say 100 kilometers an hour, which is rather quite substantial inside these buildings. And what is much more important that in a cyclonic condition, the pressure is not only positive, it could be negative also. So, for example, what we do in ourselves usually, that we study in 2 wind directions and 2 different velocities, usually sufficiently high velocity, but at least 2 different wind directions, hitting the critical, hitting the large building, and see what is the local wind flow going in and out. So if we try to compare, we see that in the same room, in the same area, the controlled technical control room, the pressure could be 1.5 kilo and negative 0.642 kilo. So something like 2 kilopascals of pressure variation. That means also that the structure will suffer that kind of vortex-induced vibrations. And as Dr. Murthy was saying, on the building side, the same kind of galloping effect can break the fuel lines, it can break multiple things. So besides the velocity itself, which is about 43 meters per second, the pressure variation, which is going from 1.5 kilo to minus 642 kilo, will have to be survived. Same thing happens in other buildings also. We can see that easily it is going to about 3 kilopascals of variations, and the wind velocity of the order of about 20 meters per second. So I will close at that because I feel that modeling can bring substantial amount of cost cutting, and probably it can be borne out by the, I'll repeat again, by the ventilation and the energy saving, and which will be probably much more easily acceptable by any industry which is looking for operational, cutting the operational cost, which is energy cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi, for your detailed presentation and sharing the concept, what you've been practicing. I think it was very interesting, and I think very useful to our listeners as well. Moving on quickly, I would now request, so I would like to thank all the 3 eminent speakers and request Mr. Mansingh, the chair of the session, to please forward his concluding remarks, and we get on to the next session. Over to you, Mr. Mansingh.
Well, I must thank all the panelists, starting with Professor Chandan Ghosh, Professor Murthy, and Mr. Tripathi for excellent presentations. At least I got my appreciation of the issues involved and the steps to be taken. Particularly, I like I've just mentioned that Professor Ghosh, that is his pet theme, because I have been hearing him quite this thing, and his natural protection. You see, that is something you have to do, particularly even to mitigate the impact of the cyclone. Mangrove forests, the coastal plantations, and on that some very basic points were made. That I'm sure the forest department, the state government agencies, and the industry themselves, because this is now one of the conditions of environment clearance which is given. And so if that is done, I'm sure that the impact of cyclones would significantly come down. Professor Murthy made some very significant points about design preparedness and the standardization of the designs, where there are huge gaps in India, as he very rightly pointed out, and I'm sure BIS, which was taking the lead in this regard, they are onto it, and some improvements we can see in the in future. Professor Tripathi gave also, you are very right. That point was also made. Because the Odisha is one of the hotspots of cyclone, and in Hudud, uh, first thing within probably half an hour of that cyclone starting, the Bhubaneswar airport was gone. Means that entire roof blew off, etc. So obviously, our design and implementation of designs leave a lot to be desired, particularly for lifeline buildings like the airport, etc. It's another thing that the airport authority and the Bhubaneswar airport authorities, together with the help of the state governments, they got back the airport into operation within less than 24 hours. So that is what then the chairman of the airport authority, he had given a presentation, excellent presentation. I thank all the speakers, and we certainly, all the participants would have gained from all the three presentations. Thank you. Thank you. Urva, please take over.
Thank you so very much, Chair Mr. Mansingh, for chairing this important session. Thank you, all the eminent three speakers. Thank you for your contribution. And thank you for sticking to time, although we are running late. I will take this opportunity now to formally welcome Shri Kamal Kishore, Honorable Member, National Disaster Management Authority. Thank you so much, Mr. Kishore, for joining us. And we are really sorry. Apologies. Please accept our apologies for this delay in starting this all-important session, where we have speakers from three key UN agencies, from UNDRR, UNIDO, and UNESCO. I would like to welcome three speakers as well. Mr. Animesh Kumar from UNDRR. Very good afternoon, Animesh. Thank you so much for joining. Mr. Ardito Kodija from UNESCO. Thank you so much for joining, Ardito. And Devajit Das. Yes, so finally we meet online. Thank you. Thank you for joining, Devajit. Mr. Kishore, before I hand over to you to chair this important session and for your remarks, I must also compliment the background you have. I think it's a very pleasing background with that beautiful painting right behind you. Ladies and gentlemen, as we get on to the last session of this day, which is on developing sustainable tools for reducing extreme weather events in the region. And I would like to give a brief introduction, although he needs no introduction, Shri Kamal Kishore, but a few lines on him. He's worked on DRR and recovery issues for over 22 long years at the national, local, regional, and global levels. Prior to joining NDMA, he's worked with UNDP for 13 years in New Delhi, Geneva, and New York. At UNDP headquarters, he led global advocacy campaigns to address disaster risk reduction concerns in UN's Sustainable Development Goals and the post-2015 Development Agenda. As program advisor, he has also led the development of disaster and climate risk management related elements of the UNDP strategic plan. This was since he's into his second term as the member of National Disaster Management Authority, and it's my proud privilege to welcome you again, Mr. Kishore. Over to you, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to chair. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Rubab, and I'm very thankful to Vicky for inviting me to participate in this session and work with colleagues. Animesh, I've worked with for many years now, and the others as well have interacted from time to time. So it's a very important topic, developing sustainable tools for managing the impacts of extreme weather events. As you know, 90% of disasters that occur are somehow or the other related to weather and climate. Extreme weather events, extreme climate event account for 90% of disasters. In the last decade or so, we have made big progress in reducing the impact of many different types of extreme weather events. We often cite the progress that countries like India and Bangladesh have made in reducing mortality from cyclones. We also have, in recent years, seen progress in reducing mortality from heat waves. Of course, for the mortality from flood in most parts of the world has remained more or less flat for decades now. So I think that's the next frontier. And in addition to that, even for cyclone and heat wave and the others, going beyond reducing the impact on lives, we really need to look at reducing the impact on livelihoods. So, last year or 2019 Cyclone Fani, for example, the mortality was much lower than it used to be 10 or 12 years ago, but the losses in infrastructure sectors, other social sectors, enormous, something to the tune of $5 billion, 40% of those losses in power sector alone. So we really have to go beyond saving lives to saving livelihoods, and in that context, working on making our infrastructure systems more resilient to extreme weather events is really key. Mention has earlier been made of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which is an initiative we are working with a number of countries alongside UNDRR, represented here by Animesh. So I'm really looking forward to what colleagues from these three agencies, different agencies, UNDRR focusing the sort of the agency that has the stewardship of the disaster risk reduction agenda, UNESCO, the scientific agency looks at oceans, looks at the tsunami early warning system, looks at scientific development in this area, and UNIDO with the industrial development work, very relevant to the theme that we are discussing today. So I'm very, very excited to hear what they have to say and learn from them during this interaction. With that, let me turn over to Animesh. Animesh, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Kamal. Very nice to see you and also be among familiar faces on the panel as well. Can we have the presentation that I had shared earlier? So while it's being uploaded, let me wish from here in Bangkok, everyone, a very good afternoon. And I would like to definitely thank the organizers in considering this very topical issue for discussion at the eConclave. FICCI in particular has been a long-standing partner of UNDRR and leads our private sector engagement and initiative, the ARISE network in India. So my name is Animesh Kumar, and I'm the acting head of the UNDRR Asia Pacific office, but my day job is the deputy head of the regional office. So in my presentation, I would seek to provide a global and regional overview on the key mechanisms and tools to address extreme events. So I would not go into the technology side of things, but focus more on sustainability and approach the topic from the perspective of physical risk, economic risk, and social risk, with a layer of resilience. And I'm sure my dear friend Pak Ardito from UNESCO and the colleague from UNIDO, Debajit, will delve deeper into some of the broader points that I would make. So next slide, please. So nearly 1/3 of the world's population is what we compose of in Asia Pacific, and with few of the fastest growing economies, and with multiple countries with rapidly expanding mid-income and middle class populations. At the same time, we compose of 45% of disasters, 70% of mortality, and almost 90% of the affected population. So while Asia Pacific continues to be the most disaster-prone region globally, as Kamal pointed out, the good news is that not only in India, but at least at the regional level as well, the frequency and impact in terms of mortality, what we call as the human impact, is declining or plateauing, especially in the last 10 years. And this is further corroborated by the global figures. If you look at the graph, we have recently submitted the Sendai Framework Implementation Report to the Secretary General, and there has been a perceptible decline, as noted in the report, in proportion of people died or affected due to disasters. However, this is coupled with an increase in economic and infrastructure losses. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the COVID-infected population in Asia Pacific in green. And just to give a kind of the message in terms of the duality that we are facing as of now in disaster occurrence. So the green graph is what COVID-infected population has been and in Asia Pacific, and the blue is the affected population by other disasters. So it's clear that while struggling against the pandemic, the Asia Pacific communities have also faced a series of other disasters, some of which have been having devastating, especially those resulting from cyclones and floods, impact. In 2020, on an average, hence the region has faced 10 disasters per month, 85 deaths per week, and 150,000 affected per day because of non-COVID related disasters. So let us look at some of the overarching challenges that the region is facing. Next slide, please. So at the outset, Asia Pacific is not on the right track to achieve the SDGs by 2030. That's the overarching message. Within these, there are a few SDGs where we are really struggling. And the bad news is for us, at least from the DRR community, is that the disaster-related targets figure among such SDGs. The region is struggling the most on climate action and reducing the human and economic costs of disasters. Next slide, please. It is well known that the risk occurrence in the region is not uniform. However, the risk space across the region is increasingly overlapping with multiple dualities. On the one hand, we have vulnerable countries like the 12 least developed countries or 15 SIDS. And on the other hand, we have around 400 million people living in extreme poverty. These nations and communities are the most vulnerable to disasters. Similarly, on the one hand, we have several of the LDCs who will soon graduate to become mid-income countries. And on the other, around 800 million people, not extremely poor, but still surviving on less than $3.2 a day. The disasters pose severe challenge to such nations and communities who may be pushed back to lower development levels and extreme poverty as they strive to move up. And all of this gets complicated when they are exposed to hazards of all kinds, especially in the hotspots. Because it is these overlapping layers of hazards and vulnerabilities that pose grave risks to nations and communities. Next slide, please. So we know that hazards and hazardous events are dynamic. However, we often tend to perceive vulnerability as static. Vulnerability but differs over space, time, and context, and hence is equally dynamic. It's defined by physical, social, and economic and environmental multiple dimensions and shaped by factors like inequality and exclusion. Next slide, please. Risk, hence, as we know by now, is systemic. It doesn't operate in isolated corridors, but in a jigsaw puzzle where each block has an implication on the other, as we are seeing in the context of COVID together with series of other disasters. Unfortunately, our planning processes, next slide, please. Our planning processes for the future are based on an analysis of what we have seen so far. But climate change is rapidly altering the risk landscape, and the past is no longer the mirror of the future. For instance, the concept note for this conclave mentions 84 coastal districts in India, which are affected by cyclones. However, I came across a recent report from CEEW, where in the last decade alone, there are 258 districts which have been affected because of cyclones in India. So the challenge outlined so far points to the fact that if we want to operate in a dynamic risk environment, our planning processes has to be dynamic. So what does this mean for the addressing of extreme events in the region? Next slide, please. So the first step is to get over our cognitive bias and ensure that while we strengthen our disaster response capabilities, we also ensure that we address the underlying risk drivers. The key risk drivers like rapid urbanization, climate change, environmental degradation, weak infrastructure, etc., that exacerbate or sometimes result in a disaster. Further, we also need to move this forward from drivers of risk and identify what are the drivers of resilience. And within these drivers of resilience, we need to identify those acupressure points that will trigger resilient development. Next slide, please. Integrated climate and disaster resilience is the need of the hour, hence. Global efforts are being made to ensure we get away from a siloed approach to climate and disaster domains and ensure we look at both from the same lens. And this includes applying the common risk analytics to both and ensure the planning processes are coherent. The disaster risk reduction can also be seen as a short to medium solution to long-term climate and developmental challenges to achieve the common objective of resilience. Next slide, please. So risk and uncertainty have become the new norm. It has become extremely important that we strengthen our risk analysis capabilities to eliminate as many unknowns as possible from our analysis. And to do so, a multidisciplinary approach is needed with constant dialogue with the people on the front line to have a constant and consistent stage of scenario building. There cannot be a one-stop model in a rapidly changing world. And such comprehensive risk analysis should then be able to inform early warning systems, for example. Again, as risks are interconnected, isolated early warning systems do not work. We need to have in place multi-hazard early warning systems that are based on a thorough analysis of risk. And such comprehensive early warnings should also be impact-based, that is, be able to trigger an action by those who receive the warning, whether in institutions or communities, which is an evolution from what the weather will be to what the weather will do. And the early component of early warning should not be lost sight of. Timeliness in warning is of essence. A key challenge we often face is the availability of financing when most needed. Early warnings should also be able to trigger financing that in turn is helpful in taking preemptive action or rapid response. Further, risk-informed approaches also have a huge interface with climate adaptation, as I pointed out earlier. Nature-based solutions should be applied in every aspect of infrastructure generation, including through a hybrid mix of green, blue, and gray infrastructure. And I would encourage you all to review a publication on this topic we have just launched this month, keeping the regional audience in mind, but also the larger issue of infrastructure resilience that Kamal was mentioning, and that has been galvanized around the CDRI, is the way to go in terms of a very practical demonstration of risk-informed development. Next slide, please. So I have so far highlighted the importance of risk analysis in preparedness for disasters. However, once we have the full understanding of risk and its quantum, we know how much of risk we can mitigate, how much of risk we can avoid, and how much we can transfer. And such risk management decisions should also need to be having a layered risk financing approach, where for each risk management decision, a specific financing approach can be followed. For instance, for high-frequency, low-impact events, a social risk management approach through regular budgetary means and livelihood-based approaches can be followed. While for high-impact events, contingency financing and market-based approaches like bonds and insurance can be resorted to. Next slide, please. This slide essentially captures what I have outlined so far. The only point I would highlight here is the importance of planning. We need to have pre-disaster contingency and recovery plans in place. We often lose a good amount of time in starting the planning process once a disaster is already in sight or has happened. Planning in advance of a disaster not only establishes the SOPs for action, but also pre-identifies the funding mechanisms and sources. And of course, these plans need to be regularly revisited with changing scenarios. Next slide, please. While financing disaster preparedness and response is straightforward, financing prevention of disaster and disaster risk requires a different set of approaches. So we keep cautioning about limited resources for disaster risk reduction. However, it is not always and often about more resources for DRR, but often about distribution of resources and budgetary allocations, especially when we talk about multi-sector approaches. For instance, we know that capital flows often follow a natural process, and we need to risk inform this flow. We also need to revisit our public financing mechanisms and seek to make a shift from a contingent liability-based approaches to social risk management approach that is based on a sector and livelihood-based programs. The role of the private sector assumes very high significance, considering that they constitute over 70% of the total GDP in most countries. If the business and industry make losses, the country cannot prosper. The discussion on the role of the private sector in DRR hence needs to move on from a corporate social responsibility-based approach to their own responsibility to save their own losses using the DRR approaches, which I think is the biggest business case for DRR. Next slide, please. And all of these paradigmatic shifts that I'm talking about require us to revisit who is our target audience. A key shift we have to make is to move beyond preaching to the converts. We need to communicate better with the planning and finance ministries, central bankers, trade representatives, the real estate developers, for them to appreciate the value of risk management. If you're really serious about strengthening resilience and disaster risk management, more needs to happen outside the conventional disaster management domain rather than inside it. Next slide, please. And finally, and that's my last slide, it's all about we, the people. Communities should be at the heart of everything we do. Disasters don't discriminate, but the underlying vulnerabilities result in differential impact of disasters. I mentioned about early warning systems at the outset. A key feature of such systems is that they should be end-to-end and increasingly bridge that last mile where the communities most at risk live and often make a difference between life and death. Digital solutions and connectivity provide newer venues to attain universal assistance and outreach and hence minimize exclusion errors. Data disaggregation, especially by age, sex, and disability, is a key requisite to inform risk management efforts. We cannot manage what we cannot measure. A word on informality in our economies. In several countries in Asia Pacific, over 90% of the private sector are MSMEs and often operate in the informal sector. And for the informal sector, risk poverty nexus is a very strong nexus due to limited assets and savings. And to address many of these challenges, social protection programs need to be strengthened. The safety net programs not only help reduce vulnerabilities, but also become the carrier of relief and assistance when needed, as we saw during the COVID-19 response and recovery efforts. So final slide, next slide. So before I conclude with all these words, I'm very pleased to invite in advance to all of you to upcoming Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, where the issues that we have discussed today so far will all be highlighted. The dates are yet to be announced, but it will be a virtual event somewhere in the middle of the year, hosted by the Government of Australia. With these words, thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Animesh, for that very comprehensive and very multidimensional overview of the issues in the Asia Pacific. I particularly noted your reminder that while we've made a lot of progress in the last 10 years, in many ways that progress is precarious. Disaster risk reduction is not a niche agenda, but it is really fundamental to sustainable development of our people in the region, of the well-being of the people of Asia Pacific. With that, now let's turn to Mr. Aradito, Pa Aradito from UNESCO.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Kamal for the introductions, and greetings to all. Also greetings to Animesh. Very nice to see you again. I think we haven't seen this year, so good to see you. Also, thank you very much for the invitation. Although when I was invited to give a talk on this event, I already mentioned that my portfolio is more on tsunami, not on the hydrometeorological hazards. So I'm not too sure if I can contribute to the event. But then upon discussions, there might be something that I can share, considering what is we have learned from what happens in Odisha when we are working on the tsunami ready community. So I'm not sure if I can share, just to try. Did you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So thank you very much. So I'm trying to look into the how actually when we work in establishing a tsunami ready community, we are actually capitalizing on cyclone preparedness that has been built in Odisha, and this is something that I would like to share with you, as considering especially Odisha is one of the community that has been recognized in Indian Ocean. So just briefly, this is about IOTIC. So I'm basically in UNESCO IOC, and I'm responsible in the tsunami, Indian Ocean Tsunami Information Center, which basically focusing on building preparedness for effective emergency response, as well as tsunami early warning systems, focusing in the Indian Ocean. This is some of the activities that we have achieved within the from 2017 to 2020. We work with 25 Indian Ocean member states. We work with 3 tsunami service providers in the Indian Ocean, which is India, Indonesia, and Australia. And we have conducted a number of activities, capacity buildings, workshops, lectures, and so forth. And in 2020, we actually achieved in recognizing 2 of the Indian community as Indian tsunami ready community being recognized by UNESCO IOC. We also involved in numbers of projects as well as conducting the exercise in the Indian Ocean. Before I move a little bit further about this, I just would like to inform that starting 2021 until 2030, we are actually come into what we call the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And this is basically into defining on the ocean that we need for the future that we want. And there are actually 7 outcomes as the ocean decade. One is to have a clean ocean, to have a productive ocean, and predicted oceans, safe ocean, accessible ocean, and inspiring and engaging oceans. And most of our activities in Indian Ocean Tsunami Information Centers basically relates to this predicted oceans and safe ocean. When we talk about safe ocean, we are talking about an oceans which does not have. It is not that an ocean that does not have any coastal hazard. Coastal hazard will happen, as that's basically the nature. But what we call the safe ocean is that basically an oceans that is understood. And when we talk about understood, then there is a need to actually understood in terms of what is the topography of the coastal as well as the bathymetry in the oceans. And for that, we can then make a predictions in terms of, for example, inundated areas due to tsunami and so forth. Second is basically oceans that is observed. So there has to be a number of monitoring systems that can actually observe the changes in the phenomena in the ocean. The last is, of course, oceans that can be predicted, in which that then, based on these observations, based on the understanding of the oceans, then we can predict if there are any upcoming threat to the coastal areas. So that relates what we call by the predicted oceans. In terms of safe oceans, what we are talking about is that people can actually continue to interact with the oceans, with the sea, for their livelihood, for their lifestyle, without having fear of any coastal hazards. And how to do that is basically making sure that the community have a very good awareness about the coastal hazard, have a very good awareness about what the areas that they are in, have the knowledge, have the preparedness, have the skills, as well as the abilities to save themselves in case of an emergency. And this is where actually we try to build to achieve what we call the safe ocean. And by working on this, basically you are contributing to all the global frameworks. You are contributing to the SDG, of course. You are contributing to this ocean decade. You are contributing to the Sendai framework, of course, and you are also contributing to the and you can actually showcase this in the Tsunami World Tsunami Awareness Days. As I mentioned, because my portfolio is basically focusing on tsunami. Just to take into what we learned, I'm not going to go into details on this, but because I think you're much better than me about this, the great super cyclone in, especially in Odisha in 1999, where it has actually caused a lot of life loss as well as economical loss. But I think in this super cyclones becomes a game changers especially in Odisha, in which that based on what happens, the state government of Odisha started to actually build their own preparedness for cyclone. They built multi-purpose cyclone and flood shelters. They developed community preparedness. There is, in terms of construction technologies of houses, they are also starting to look into cyclone-resistant buildings. There is established disaster managements and disaster managers within the community. There is a very strong correlation as well as linkage as well as cooperations between central, state, district, blocks, and communities in terms of the disaster management plan. So the super cyclone actually changed all of this and built the cyclone preparedness especially for the coastal communities in Odisha state. Now, based on that, as you know, India has INCOIS as the tsunami early the agency who is responsible in tsunami early warning system, and INCOIS has been working in all of the coastal of India and identified that even in 2004, it's basically only Nicobar, Andaman, which is really affected by the 2004 tsunamis, but the tsunami hazards in coastal areas, either on the eastern part as well as on the western part, is actually tsunami prone areas. And with that, then the state of Odisha starts to participate in UNESCO IOC's activities related to tsunami preparedness. So they are engaging in most of our tsunami Indian Ocean wave exercises that we did 2011, 14, 16, 18, and 20. And gradually, the capacity and capabilities in terms of emergency response related to cyclones were also adapted so that it can also be used as a response to tsunami emergency. Of course, and just to mention, there are now actually 2 communities in Odisha, in Noliasahi in Jagatsinghpur districts in Odisha and Venkatraipur in Ganjam districts, who actually already received the tsunami ready recognition from UNESCO IOC. This recognition is given for 3 years, and this is that there is a sustainability. There are reporting that needs to be done by the community that saying that they are fulfilling all the requirements and they are sustaining their level of preparedness according to the indicators that we have set. So there are mechanisms to make sure that when they receive the recognitions, then they have the obligations to actually maintain this level of preparedness throughout the as to be continuous being recognized. Once they actually miss all of this, then their recognitions can be taken out or can be revoked. So now, I think this recognition was given in July 2020. So we have within the next 3 years, we will monitor as well as evaluate their level of preparedness. So of course, we need to understand it's completely different between cyclone and tsunami. And there are, in terms of emergency response, responding to cyclone emergency as well as responding to tsunami emergency, it's completely different. And this is where actually the Odisha disaster management agencies at the district level, as well as the block level, as well as the state level, were able to actually adapt and modify their previous cyclone preparedness and making that it actually follows the requirements in terms of tsunami when there is an emergency. Tsunami is a fast-paced event. It can happen in minutes or hours. It depends on the near field or the far field of the case. But then the basics of the tsunami, the basic of the disaster preparedness is almost similar. The only quite specific is that the timeline that has been developed in terms of responding to a cyclone as well as responding to tsunami, it is different. In tsunami evacuations also might be different. There is an evaluation in terms of whether the multi-purpose shelters is actually located in a safe place looking into the tsunami. So there are a number of evaluations being taken to make sure that although we are capitalizing from the cyclones, but it still fulfill the requirements of the tsunami emergency preparedness. So The IOC Tsunami Ready is basically a program that we developed, and it has been implemented since 2011 globally. Mostly it started in Caribbean, and gradually it moved to Pacific, and now it is being implemented in the Indian Ocean. And these are the reasons why we need the Tsunami Ready, because, as you know, in many cases, tsunami early warning system, even though it works, but if the people doesn't know how to respond to this early warning system, then the warning systems fail. And also we know that in the community that is not prepared, there is a very higher risk in terms of loss of life as well as loss of property. In many cases, especially, for example, taking Indonesia, it is we are really in the near field tsunami where the tsunami can arrive within minutes. Then the response of the community needs to be based on this natural phenomenon rather than waiting for official tsunami early warning system. Of course, there might be a broken warning chain because of the, especially, for example, if there is an earthquake, communications broken down and so forth. So there are a lot of consideration why actually the community itself needs to be their preparedness in terms of responding to this tsunami. So we are focusing on community preparedness, but we are part of the end-to-end early warning system. So we link actually from the early warning systems that is doing the detections, the monitoring, and also lead it into the how actually community can be prepared. It is a performance base based on a certain indicator agreed globally. At present, there are already 25 communities in 15 countries that receive UNESCO IOC recognition as a tsunami ready community. And as I mentioned, mostly in Caribbean, then it's moved to Pacific, and in Indian Oceans, we only have at present only 2 communities that it has been recognized, which is in India. The program is basically building the ownerships of preparedness, bringing the ownership of the preparedness to the community. So there is a share of responsibilities between the official disaster management offices, either at the state, blocks, as well as sharing the responsibilities at the community level. Building these tsunami ready communities, we are ensuring that we are following a certain process, which is it has to be a structurally as well as a participatory approach, and it is a collective effort that needs to be involved a lot of stakeholders, basically to meet the guidelines and the indicators. We have 12 indicators consisting the component of mitigation, preparedness, and response. These are the 12 indicators that needs to be fulfilled by the community to be able to be recognized as tsunami ready. So there are certain checklists as well as measures that needs to be accomplished by the community to be recognized. And then based on these 12 indicators, this is something that they need to actually maintain to be able to continue to be recognized as a tsunami ready community. I'm not going to go into details of each of the indicators, but this is basically covering, again, mitigation, preparedness, and response. We really learned from India how actually it was implemented, because as I mentioned, in the oceans, India is the first country who received this UNESCO IOC recognitions, and the 2 villages are in Odisha, and we try to learn into what's happening. And then the most important thing is number 3, which is there is already a lot of background works being done in India, and this is based on the cyclone preparedness. So there is already the disaster risk reduction policies, plans for cyclones that has been set up. There is already settings in terms of the provincial, district, block level of centers. There is a lot of buy-in from the community, how important it is because of their
horrifying experience. So all of this actually becomes one of the success stories, as well as the background why it is quite India can actually quite fast in terms of implementing this tsunami ready. Number 5 is very important. So there is a strong ownership on disaster risk activities in the villages. Again, this is because of their experience in 1999 super cyclone. And there is a strong professional relationship between the Odisha state disaster management agencies until the community level. And then, based on these two recognitions to the two community, state of Odisha is targeting 324 villages in Odisha will be receiving the tsunami recognition. So they are now working on this. They are planning to have this in 2022, but because of COVID, we just been informed by the OSDMA that it might be delayed because of this COVID, but they continue to work in terms of making sure that most of the villages in Odisha will also receive this tsunami ready recognition from UNESCO ISC. So that's maybe what I can share. Oh, and I think when we talk about tsunami ready community, one needs to make sure that we understand that it is an ecosystem of the society. So it is not only the people. We are talking about tsunami ready. We are talking also about safe schools and safe hospitals, an initiative that has been implemented and initiated by UNDRR. We are talking about tsunami. And one thing that is actually still missing is on this side, which is we are talking about tsunami ready industries, tsunami ready airport, harbors, tsunami ready infrastructures, tsunami ready hotels, and so forth. So there are still a lot of works that we need to do to make sure that on this side there is also a built capacity in terms of tsunami ready. Thank you very much. I hope this is useful in sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Paradito. That was a very interesting presentation. You started with an introduction to the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. So we are talking about the decade in the first month of the decade itself. So that's very good. I think we have to really make use of this opportunity to advance the disaster risk reduction agenda. The presentation you made about the Indian Ocean Tsunami Early Warning System, the work that has been done since 2004, after the 26th December 2004 tsunami, is truly an example of international collaboration in achieving risk reduction for people who are exposed to natural hazards such as tsunamis. It is also an example of how to take science to the people and not just remain in the ivory towers. The whole rigor that you're bringing about under UNESCO's leadership in terms of what really are the indicators of a tsunami-ready community. So, as much seriousness in doing rigorous work at the community level as doing high-end science in terms of detecting the tsunami occurrence and, relaying information on that. So thank you for that. With that, now let's turn over to Mr. Debajit Das from UNIDO. Debajit, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamal Kishorji, and good afternoon, all the audience. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Yes. So I did prepare a presentation, but maybe I'll just talk for the sake of saving some time. So what I wanted to talk is about industries, how they should approach towards preparing themselves to face the extreme event. And as an event agency, of course, we always correlate the extreme events with climate change. And whatever our industrial or day-to-day operations, I think that has a bearing with what we are creating I think we all know that this 1 decade or 2 decades of extreme events has almost lost around 0.5 million human deaths and the loss of around 3.5 trillion. These are some of the figures which shows the severity of extreme events. And so at the backdrop of what is this climate changes are happening, the frequency, the intensity and spatial extent or duration or the pattern of weather, I think these are all science and different agencies are working as to understand the dynamics of it and how we can well prepare ourselves as a society on different parts of the world. So I think India, in terms of climate risk index, I think we have now jumped to more than 9 places in terms of our vulnerability rankings. And in the last, as per the German watch, I think our position is 5th in terms of the climate vulnerability country. So whether it is storms or cyclones, drought, or we are seeing a lot of different events in India, and which are causing catastrophic damages. And in doing all of this, I think industries are very much part of our society, and they are contributing as well as they are also responding to these severe events. Now, what I would highlight is only a few things about industries, how they should approach. There are, of course, the topic is about tools. There are different tools which have been made, but it depends on which sectors and which kind of cluster or parts of the world we belong to. So I think I'll put up a kind of generic approach as to how industries should prepare or kind of approach when to mitigate the risk. I would just take one or two small minutes to apprise you that you need to, in India, has been working on a knowledge platform which is called Building Back Business from Crisis, keeping, of course, COVID in mind. In recent times, the impact which has been created and how industries are trying to cope up. So this repository of information has been greatly appreciated by the MSMEs around the country. And Ministry of MSME also is showing a lot of interest into this. So in a specific sections where we have built in this, this talks about various things like occupational health and safety is only one part, but then how the industries should protect their supply chain, how should they protect their operations, and how should they protect their manpower and health and safety. Overall, in each of these elements we have addressed, there's a detailed kind of a checklist has been prepared and few presentations, and there is guidance and fact sheets are incorporated, and practical advisory notes has been given by different experts in this knowledge platform. The platform's website address is b3cmsme.org, which could be a lot of use for different industrial partners who is probably participating in this. So in there we have highlighted both the outside the boundary of the industries, how it should be, disaster should be seen, and inside the industry how you should have a plan to have a for mitigating the disaster. Now then we have, of course, in terms of tool also, World Bank also has kind of screening tools World Bank has prepared, which is known as World Bank Climate Change Knowledge Portal, and they have designed a specific tool called Think Hazard, which is a web-based tool enabling non-specialists to consider the impact of disasters on new developmental projects. So what I want to talk is how the industry should prepare. One is, of course, this is the full damming cycle, what we know as PDCA cycle, like plan, do, check, and act. That's how we basically improvise our system. So we need to identify what are the different risks involved with your industrial operations. So you need to consider, as per your location, what are the types of natural disaster your region is susceptible to. Then after doing that, I think determination of the critical functions, what are the different functions of your operations would seem to be susceptible to such kind of disaster that needs to be identified. And accordingly, you need to also determine the disaster effect. In doing that, how extreme weather risk can either affect your critical operations and overall as a business, how this can have an impact. That impact analysis needs to be assessed. While doing that, one important point is what we used to highlight is that it needs to be, you need to think of beyond your industrial boundary. When creating your emergency plan, you should not only focus region, but also see where your key customers and suppliers and vendors are also located. So every time when you plan this kind of emergency plan, you need to have a backup plan, for addressing your stakeholders, the whole ecosystem you need to keep in mind. Then protecting the people who works for your industry or for a business, that's you need to the development of an emergency evacuation plan to get your employees out of the building safely, suppose some disaster happens, and stock up on safety tools such as whatever equipments you need to have during a flood or wind or any kind of adverse situations. Then at most also important is you protecting your data, because apart from the people who operate it, I think one of the critical elements of all our industrial or business operations is our data. So we need to have the cloud storage of your whatever business data, critical data, that those need to be identified and kept in safe place. Suppose something happens, you have an option to retrieve it. The next step is to keep in touch with the people. Once the disaster happens, I think even at the time of disaster, how you should be readily able to outreach to those people whom you care for as in part of your business operations. So you need to have a list of employees, customers, and suppliers. Keep it handy or online and update it completely monthly. And then once all these things are in place, keep it going. You should keep the operations going. Once even the disaster happens, post disaster also, you should figure out where employees can work, or if suppose there is a severe weather conditions, whether they can work from home, whether they have the access to different equipment, software, network access. So a backup plan should be there, and accordingly your response should be decided when this disaster happens. Now there are different alternate approach also. People suggest some different organization, multinationals, big companies, they have also their different approaches. Some of them also suggest a very straightforward approach, like you need to assess your infrastructure as to what are the elements that are prone to the disaster. Keep the line of communication open. You should lead by your example. And as far as possible, the automation or your orchestration should be in place so that the operations is smooth whenever the disaster happen. And your emergency plan always needs to be tested and repeated so that it is robust and your fast response is ensured. So these are some of the approach. Now you need to, when we talk about as a part of UN agency, of course, we are responsible for the industrial development. And as we all know, there are 17 SDG goal, and one of the SDG goal is building resilient infrastructure and promote inclusive and sustainable infrastructure. So there we address climate resilient industries and infrastructure. So in doing that, what is important is from the design itself, when the are siting or in a specified place, like Dr. Murthy was addressing certain technological advancement or our tools which can be used to incorporate in the design itself. So those kind of approaches are required at the siting itself. Now once you have placed your industrial site, then I think there are very small limitations which may happen to facilitate the retrofit of certain elements. So nowadays, when we talk about siting an industrial zone, I think this our unit is one of the concept is very popular, that is eco-industrial park. Unity has demonstrated along with GIZ and World Bank a very robust design tool where all these different elements, like your in terms of environmental management, energy management, or water, or natural environment and climate resilience. So that is part taken care of as a environmental performance indicator in the eco-industrial park placement. So we adopt basically a value chain approach for implementing the building climate resilient industries and for different communities. So also the policymakers, we basically do some kind of advocacy so that it is increasingly recognized that the growing needs of integrating the strategies for climate resilient infrastructure along with the industries in mind into long-term development programs. We have demonstrated successful such kind of approaches of building the climate resilient infrastructure not only in India but also in different parts of the world. One successful story which I can just give an example is from the Pakistan Sialkot's tannery industries, which is flood prone, and there is a new design which has been established so that the industries become flood resilient.
Devajit, maybe if you can begin to wind up. Thank you.
I think I am just closing. Yeah. So with this, I think what is important for the industries to understand is their different stakeholders, how their participation is ensured in the whole disaster management plan process, and how their capacity is built up in terms of what they can do. Suppose a disaster can happen, that should be the responsibility of industries, and that's how probably the efficiency can be built up. With this, I think I'll wind up the discussion for this. Thank you so much for your listening.
Thank you, Mr. Devajit Das. Very interesting perspective. Particularly the work that you're doing on building back business from crisis and all the different elements of this. And also your reminder that when you're talking about building resilience, it's not just the resilience of the core operations, but you also have to look at your supply chains, your clients, your customer base. So really, what is very topical these days, a systems view of risk and taking a systemic approach to risk reduction. So, colleagues, we've had a very fruitful session where we had three very different perspectives. Animesh gave an overview of disaster risk situation in the entire Asia Pacific. We heard from Aradito the progress that has been made in tsunami early warning system, particularly the work on rigorously pursuing community preparedness at the local level and having a very clear notion of what qualifies as a tsunami ready community. And then, of course, we heard an industry preparedness perspective from Devajit as well. With that, I would like to thank everyone for participating. If there are any questions, since we are running late, I'm sure Fiki and our hosts will facilitate interaction with the speakers. Thank you very much and have a very good afternoon. Stay safe.
Thank you so very much, Kamal Kishore. Thank you so much for chairing this very important session. Although we are really behind time, but what we propose is that there are certain questions which we'll send out to the speakers individually, and we'll connect and we'll seek those answers and we'll share it with the people who've asked those questions. We have almost over 400 participants who have signed in on our bike platform, which is a Fiki's property, a virtual platform which Fiki has created exclusively to facilitate such deliberations, which can have endless number of participants from across the world. So thank you so much again, all the three eminent speakers, the chair, Kamal Kishore, thank you so much. I would like to take this opportunity to also thank our partners, the GIS partner, ESRI India, ESRI India, associate sponsors, GAIL, Indian Oil Corporation Limited, Power Grid, and RMSI. Thank you so much. Yet again, this was a very intriguing session, as it was expected. We had some very key eminent professionals from UNDRR, UNIDO, and UNESCO talking, and I think there have been very interesting, very rightly were pointed out by the chair. So we've taken a note of this, sir, and Kamalji, this 3-day program, which we have organized in partnership with NIDM, NDMA, and Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, and DST, we would be compiling the outcomes and the thoughts which have been shared by the experts during these 3 days, and we'll be submitting formally a report as an outcome report of this eConclave to NDMA and to all our partners. So on that note, till tomorrow 11 o'clock, when we have the third technical session, which is on analyzing risk of cyclones in the. I think this is one of those subjects which even the CDRI is looking at very seriously. As you know, when you talk about resilient infrastructure from power and telecom point of view, and that is one of the reasons, Kamalji, we've picked up this specific subject, where we have speakers from Adani Power, we have from Power Finance Corporation India, Griffith University Australia, an expert from there, and also Power Grid Corporation. So that starts tomorrow. So requesting all the participants to join us, sign in tomorrow at the same time, using the same email ID which you used today to log in. Until then, thank you so much and have a good day ahead. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Animesh. Thank you, Vito. Thank you, Devaji. Thank you so much, Kamalji. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you so much for all your support. Thank you, Mr. Tripathi, for your very interesting presentation. Dr. Rajkumar, thank you again, sir. Thank you so much for supporting us today. Thank you, the entire team from FICCI, Akhil Gupta, Mainak Majumdar, Sanjeev Kumar, Varun Sharma. You guys have been amazing. And also the team from NIDM, who's supporting Chandan Ghosh Saab. I think it was a very fruitful day today, and very interesting deliberations which took place. And I'm sure the participants who are connected with us must have really benefited out of this. So until tomorrow, I will take your leave, sir, and we will connect again tomorrow at 10:45 and for more interesting questions. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay.